So let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Thanks for everyone for coming out tonight to participate. We appreciate it. First up on our agenda is to proclaim August 6th to the 12th as Farmers Market Week. Do we have someone here in attendance that perhaps has a video they'd like to show us? Yes.
Hello, Commissioners. Helen Schnoes, Douglas County Food Systems Coordinator. I'm here today with representatives from each Lawrence Farmers Market, including the Downtown Lawrence Market, the oldest market in the city, the Clinton Parkway Nursery Farmers Market, and the Cotton's Hardware Farmers Market, all in celebration of National Farmers Market Week. Yesterday I was in Lecompton where they declared it Farmers Market Week. Tomorrow we're at Douglas County, and Eudora, Jefferson County, and Perry are all participating in the celebrations this year. And it's a particularly celebratory year for our farmers markets because we are launching a new collaborative marketing campaign, Farmers Markets of Kaw Valley, that is the outcome of the 2-year USDA Farmers Market Promotion Program grant that the Food Policy Council received in August of 2015. And so January this year was the first time all our markets came together, and it's a really exciting output, what they've been able to do together to support healthy eating, local food, and a strong local food economy. So with that, we have 2 videos that have been prepared, and our HOW has done a new collaborative webpage hosted by Explore Lawrence that can be accessed at fmkawvalley.org. But I will show you.
Like you got more of these in the back on the podium.
We'll put more back there, and these were made for it.
I like coming to the farmers markets because I like supporting the local farmers. I enjoy getting fresh produce instead of grocery store imported from some other country.
I think I really like this market because I know a lot of the people and it's very welcoming.
The local farmers market always has the basics, what I need. And I like all of what I get.
Everything is so green and fresh.
And I always find it kind of as an inspiring way to figure out what I'm going to cook or try new things. You know, you might see, I grabbed some fennel and shallots because I thought, wow, that's going to be really good roasted together.
I think the availability of food here is great.
Well, it has become kind of a tradition with our family to come to the farmers market because I feel like the farmers, besides giving us their wares, also give us an education on where our food comes from.
It's so wonderful to be able to come midweek to pick up and buy produce that's fresh right off the farm. A lot of the vendors told me they had just picked some of these items this afternoon.
When I come to the market, I like the fresh greens, the kale, the spinach, when it's in season. I have corn and garlic. I have lovely tomatoes that are perfect, but then I also bought some that are not perfect, and those are going to get cut up and be in salsa.
Today I bought beets and blackberries and cucumbers, and also
What'd you eat already? Squash?
Oh, 2 peaches.
Quiches and scones from Karen. We really like getting vegetables, whatever's in season really, and often we get eggs, and honey sticks.
When the farmers markets started, this made it easier to get local food because that is probably the most important aspect of the farmers market is that it's here, and I really want to support that.
Come and visit, experience it. It's amazing.
You should really go to the farmers market.
Very nice video.
Thank you.
Did you have a second one you were saying?
That was both the 2 together.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank
Kurt
you.
was very helpful in making it a seamless transition.
Excellent. I was worried my microphone went off, so I perhaps didn't see the change. Okay, so we have the proclamation here. Whereas farmers markets are important outlets for agricultural producers nationwide, providing them with increased opportunities to meet consumer demand for a variety of fresh, affordable, convenient, and healthful products sold directly from the farm. And whereas the farmers markets of Kaw Valley play a key role building a strong local food economy, a community priority highlighted in our new Douglas County Food System Plan that supports the viability of family farms and entrepreneurs and preserves agricultural lands. Whereas the City of Lawrence recognizes the myriad benefits of farmers markets for producers and consumers, such as fostering safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods, and is fully committed to supporting farmers markets' continued success. Now therefore, I, Leslie Soden, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, do hereby proclaim the week of August 6th through 12th as Farmers Market Week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And I'd be remiss, the leaders of the farmers market have invited you all to come ring the bell and initiate market on Saturday if you're interested. Excellent. Thank you. All right, so now we'll move on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Do we have any items that a member of the commission wishes to remove? I'm going to remove 4M just for voting purposes. 7A, B, and C. Any other items? Is there something on the consent agenda a member of the public wishes to remove? Okay, thank you, Phil. Okay, so with the exception of items 4M and number 7, I'll take a motion to approve the consent agenda with the addition of claims for a total vendors in the amount of $195, for a total dollar amount of $3,108,155.72. Motion made by Commissioner Amick, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, so first up, here you go, Stuart, is number 4. Pass it down to Sherry, please. Is 4M, which has to do with the budget. 4M is the actual 2018 City of Lawrence operating in 2018 to 22 capital improvement budget, ordinance number 9387. So like I said, it's just for voting purposes, so if someone wants to make that motion.
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Amick, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. So motion passes 4-1 with the Mayor Soden voting no. And so now we're on to number 7, which has to do with East 9th Street project. So we had 2 people wishing to remove that, Commissioner Larson and Phil Collison, the East Lawrence Neighbors Association. Would you like to go first, Lisa?
Things on here. Just a clarification as to what's the on item B specifically, the $2.5 million, exactly what that entails. I think I was under the assumption that it included something that it did not, that it does not, and that's the underground electrical. And I know I talked to Chuck about it today, so I just wanted to get better clarification as to what we are actually approving for the $2.5 million.
So Commissioner, back in June, the Commission gave us the direction to proceed with what we've called the basic street design. It's basically the street. The Commission made a specific motion to take off the bike lanes and have 2 6-foot sidewalks, one on each side. It did not include putting all the Westar and Midco and AT&T lines underground. That was an additional cost. Westar has given us an estimate of about $330,000, and they at that time were willing to share that cost with the city 50-50. If we put the electrical underground, we will have to install because all the poles will be gone, we will have to install poles to light the intersections. So we estimate that to be about $10,000 per intersection for 6 intersections. So if you were to put the utilities underground, the electrical, AT&T, and at this point, Midco, the additional cost would be approximately $165 for the lines plus the additional $60,000 to light the intersections. So you're about 200 and, what is that, 25?
Yeah, that would bring the total to 2.405.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in having that in there. I'd like to hear what the commission says on that.
It seemed to me that the math still adds up if we have a $2.5 million line item there. Even with the buried electrical, we're not to 2.5 yet, correct?
Okay, so these are very, very
Well, yeah,
preliminary
I understand.
estimates.
I understand.
And the reason why we put the 2.5 in was, you know, we don't want to end up coming in at a $100,000 over what the commission wanted, and then we start all the discussions again. So it was a budget number is the 2.5. I'm not saying that we still can't do that. I'm just saying, and we probably need to visit with Westar and make sure that that's still possible. It is a timing issue for them. It's really significant as well for AT&T and Midco. It's not a little project for all 3 of those utilities.
Okay.
So, but it's something, if the commission as a group decide you want to pursue, we can start those conversations up again.
Okay.
That wouldn't necessarily affect tonight's actions as far as proceeding with the design, because they would do their own design, their own construction.
I was going to just ask that question. Would we have to do the bonds tonight, the general obligation bonds, or can we wait, a week on that while you find out what that additional cost might be?
Well, as Commissioner Herbert said, I mean, we could, within the scope of the estimate, unless you wanted to, because we've just approved the budget at 2.5, so that's what we've got.
Right.
So you could go ahead and approve everything, and it's just a matter of talking with Westar and the other utilities and making sure we can still get this done. It is a timing issue for them. It's a substantial relocation for everybody, and AT&T and Midco are hanging on the Westar pole, so they can't move, until Westar moves, and Westar can't take the poles down until they're off, and so it's a coordination effort.
So Chuck, actually, Westar actually takes the poles down.
Westar will take the poles down.
Including the ones that are ours too. Are there any of them?
There's none that are ours on that
none
section.
That are ours, okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner, I guess in answer to your question, because this is a project that, I've got several years of my life involved with, and it doesn't quite match what the committee that I worked on, approved quite a while back. I definitely would support, the placing underground those overhead lines. I think it makes all the sense in the world. So if we can do it with inside the money that's been appropriated, I think I think it would be a smart move.
Okay, we'll visit with I don't know if we need an action on that. The commission.
At this point, I think you could express your interest in doing that. It sounds to me like you want to be able to do it within the $2.5 million.
Yes.
And so this is all going to come down to design, construction bids, evaluation of the bids, and then determining whether you have enough money after the bids come in between that and the 2.5 and making that decision. So I think maybe just an expression that is a preference that be done, as long as it can be done within the 2.5.
Right.
That would give us the direction I think we need to move ahead and still work with that.
The only caveat I might add, Tom, would be Westar and Midco and AT&T will need to move before we get those bids. Otherwise, we'll be another year if we wait until they move to see where we're at. So they'll have to start working on that immediately, so we kind of have to make the commitment to them.
So the cart's before the horse.
Yeah, we have to kind of make the commitment to them. We won't know what the bids are until after their work's probably done or well underway. We really don't want to bid it until we know they're out of the way.
I see Darren's here tonight. Can he offer any more as to the construction bid on this?
On the estimate?
Yes.
What do you think? Are we close? It's a loaded question.
Hi, Commissioners, Mayor, Darren Ammon, Bartlett and West. Essentially, Chuck's kind of summed it up, but from our perspective, we have looked at this, and I do want to reiterate what he already mentioned a little bit. This is a preliminary estimate. So our contract originally was with El Dorado Architects through the conceptual design and some of that. We now have the full design scope in front of you tonight, but we've looked at a lot of different things based on the current proposed parameters, 3-lane section, and all of those different things. Is it within the ballpark? My answer would be yes. But again, if things change based on any other discussions and different things, that could affect the bids. We did have initial discussions with Westar multiple times throughout the process early on. They noted that they would be interested in working with the team and everything to put that underground, but because of so many unanswered questions and parameters, they couldn't say it's, $1 or $1 million. They've got that narrowed down a little bit more now, but I think some of the questions in terms of getting stuff out of the way and actually putting the utilities underground is a really big timing issue. So long answer to your question, but it feels like the cost estimate is within range unless we start to change a lot of the parameters that have been talked about between myself and Public Works.
Okay, so this is a change in the parameter. I presume you did your estimate based on not putting the utility or paying for the utility underground.
Correct.
And when we did the 2.5, what kind of contingency did we build in?
We've also got $200,000 contingency. So
And the price of the underground is $225.
$225. Yeah, but we had a budget of 2.3 at that time. We budgeted 2.5.
Yeah, 2.2.
2.2.
Yeah.
So all things line up. Yeah, we're good. But it's one of those things. Until we've been getting good.
2.18. It's close. I know.
You had to say that.
It's close.
So, we can proceed with what we've got laid out. Start talking with Westar, get an agreement. I'm sure they're going to want an agreement before they expend too much money for that. They'll get a better estimate, and then we'll bring this back and see if we can get this underground.
There's some risk in, having to dip into other funds to do this. Especially now that it's known that we'd have to make the commitment to Westar before we know the bid. And that's just to get them in the sequencing loop?
Well, yeah, we won't want to get the bids until we know Westar and all the utilities are out of the way. Otherwise, then we're holding up the contractor. He's just sitting there waiting because he can't do any work until the other utilities get out of the way.
Now, Westar would give us a price before we sign a contract, wouldn't they?
Oh, sure, yeah.
How long is that going to push back the project then?
Well, if we start talking to them now, they talked about 6 months for design and 6 months to do construction. Same thing with Midco and AT&T.
But they're not going to start any of that until Westar's out of the way. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how long does it take Westar to bury 6 blocks of line?
They wanted 6 months for construction.
It's buried, connect, disconnect.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff goes on.
First of all, I would have to say if it can't be done within $2.5 million, we're probably not going to be able to do it unless we do some serious soul searching to find funds to be able to do it. I think $2.5 million is probably the limit on the project. If it can't come in under that, I think you need to report to us immediately so we can get this settled. We can go ahead and move on.
Mm-hmm. I think that sounds good.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thanks.
All right, Phil.
Hi, I'm Phil Collison. And for the next minute or so, I am going to be wearing the hat of the president of the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association. Last night we had our meeting, and we did construct a little bit of a statement, and it applies in general to the whole project. ELNA, the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association, has an expectation of public input and that the neighborhood will be a part of designs in public works projects. And we'd like to see the plans and see what's going on and maybe get an update halfway through. As regarding the art side of it, there's a troubling trend of public meetings that are scheduled without much notice and during non-traditional times, and we're referring to the Cultural Arts Commission doing their Tuesday morning early meetings that seem to get about 5 days notice. We think that better communication could be happening in that regard. Now I'm going to take off my ELNA hat and say that keep the street project simple. Build it next year. And as far as the art project goes, I'm going to second what Dave Lowenstein submitted this afternoon about the how that art process would work. And I just see it being another thing that you're doing to us, and it doesn't translate to doing for us or with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Porter?
Mayor, Commissioners, Porter Arneal, Director of Arts and Culture. Not sure what direction you want. Do you want me to go over the whole
Well, I guess I had a
agenda
question.
item?
Let me ask a question.
Please.
So I was looking at the letter that the Lawrence Arts Center, I guess you sent a letter to LAC, and then they sent a letter to Art Plays. So I guess my question is did ELNA have input on either of those letters?
Not at this stage. What's happened is, as Mike mentioned, this was presented to the City Commission May 2016, the overall project, and then it's been in basically a limbo-like state for about a year. During that time, the Lawrence Arts Center has been working hard to make sure that Art Place has been informed so that we can make sure we keep that grant if possible. And so that's been transpiring over the last year or so. And then in January, as plans started to formulate to turn this into more of a basic street repair project, Kimberly asked for a meeting, and Sarah and Kimberly and Diane and I met briefly, talked about the circumstances, and they requested a letter from us just outlining a general sort of scope of what would the city do if the money stayed in place, even if the project changed. And so that's the letter that you see from this spring. And then we met again before Kimberly Williams announced that she was leaving, and talked through other possibilities based on what Art Place responded as far as their criteria and what their expectations are. And so ultimately they put in a time frame on this that they wanted something fairly formal by July 31st this month, or past month, in part because the money has to be spent before June 2020. The Art Place program sunsets in June, so we don't have a lot of time to spend this money as it stands right now. So we worked together. The Lawrence Cultural Arts Commission met. There's no meetings happening during the cultural coffee and culture meetings. That wasn't happening. They were kept abreast of these letters, and just the fact that we met with the Lawrence Arts Center to make sure that we were keeping Art Place informed, making sure that we were adapting to what Art Place was requesting, and ultimately came up with this plan. Sarah Bishop, I have to give her a lot of credit for working through this with us. In order to keep the money, we have to make sure Art Place is happy. They have been extending the grant, and at this point I believe the grant is extended, but we're still waiting to hear firm affirmation that they agree with what we're planning at this point, and that has been written as very intentionally wide open. Artists can really do anything from potentially a traditional, object in the public space for permanent use, or something ephemeral. They could do a film or a musical piece or different things, which is consistent with what we were doing with the first group of East 9th Street artists. And we want to maintain that contract because those artists were selected through what I believe is a valid process. I'm sure that Sarah and Cindy can speak to this too if you have questions for them.
One thing I was personally curious about is that there was somewhere in here about extending the downtown sculpture exhibit down 9th Street.
That was a preliminary suggestion in that first letter that I wrote. At that point, we were frankly guessing to some degree of what we could do and trying to feel out Art Place as far as what their parameters were. So that is pretty much, that one facet has been dropped in favor of this, which is more about specifically awarding projects to local artists, including a local arts administrator for that kind of professional development opportunity, and having a very public process with all of these things where the artists are really going to have to engage with the community, and that includes ELNA, to work through their projects and make sure that these are acceptable to everybody in the community as well.
Yeah, I think what's important to me is that we make sure that the neighborhood and neighbors are very involved in the process, because I can understand how this feels like, you know, it's been reworked but without their direct input. So we don't want to do that. We want to have them involved from everything, you know, for everything. So I guess I want to make sure that you start having meetings with them that talks about what you're going to do.
As soon as Art Place comes back with, you know, an affirmation that this is how we can proceed, then we plan to do that. And we plan to come to you all with a, you know, a more thoroughly fleshed out plan so that we have a better idea of exactly how these things will be implemented, who's going to be on selection panels and that type of thing. So we'll work through that.
Well, okay. Well, that's all I needed to know. I didn't really need anything from anyone else. Did anyone else have any
Just one
questions?
quick question.
Go
The
ahead.
coffee and culture meeting that you've been having once a month, is that related to the East 9th Street project?
No, that's been for coffee and culture, and this morning it happened to be somewhat unique in the sense that they wanted to talk about the agenda item tonight for the work study session, but that's really been more friendly, just let's talk about what's going on for arts and culture in the community.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, is there any public comment on this item?
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name's Katie Welsh. I'm speaking as 732 Rhode Island. I'm speaking as a private citizen tonight. Feels like Groundhog Day. Mr. Arneal just said that it would be a very public process, and yet, once again, the Art Center has begun the process just as they did three and a half years ago, without having East Lawrence at the table. So let's not do it all again, folks. As you just said, Mayor, let's have ELNA at the table at every meeting, please. Plus, we've done so much work and so much research, and we can give you all the research that we've done over these years to help the process and help the engineers. And we won't have another situation where, like the El Dorado architects didn't realize it was a truck route. And that delayed us by a year because they had to start their design over. So at least it's a hometown group working on this one, and that encourages me. I also wanted to talk about the underground electrical that just came up that you were discussing. And I'd like to ask Mr. Marcus what funds we would dip into to pay for the added utility costs. And then lastly, I really like and respect Bartlett and West, and Darren dropped everything to talk to me when I had questions about the East 9th Street project. You know, I have a high regard for their work. But they got, I think, from my reading of all the budgets in these past few years on this project, they got $34,000, I believe, on the first project to do surveys. Unfortunately, they're not public. We can't find them anywhere, the surveys for the street. So I think it would only be fair to see the work they've done already on East 9th. And then also, are they on retainer with the city? Are they the go-to firm for engineering when we're not doing it in-house? Otherwise, it seems really odd that they were given a no-bid contract. So that's another question I have. Thank you.
Thank you, KT. So, Darren, let me ask Darren this question real quick.
Sure.
Are there street surveys that you can show KT that
Sure.
you've done?
Yeah, so with
Okay.
our original contract that we did with as part of the preliminary work with El Dorado, there was a topographic survey that was done of the corridor. So that's how we had the preliminary base information. There'll be a little bit of that within this contract as well, because some of the buildings along New Hampshire weren't quite finished when they had went through that process the first time. But as far as I'm aware, we're not opposed to sharing those. It's just existing conditions of what's out there in the street, so that wouldn't be a problem at all.
Okay, just get with her at another time and.
Could that be uploaded to the city website that Porter has?
You guys talk about it later, how you want to view them, and however Porter wants to put them up, and if there's a problem, come and talk to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darren.
You're welcome.
And then there was the question about no bid contract or
Well,
retainer.
the question to me, I think that I heard KT ask was, where would the money come from? And I think there is a bit of a sequencing problem here. We have to make a commitment, according to Chuck, for the undergrounding of the lines before we know what the estimate is. So I can't really answer where I would get the money because I have no idea how much the money would be. Brian whispered in my ear during this conversation that we do have some funds allocated for fiber to the tune of about $100,000. But when the commission said, yeah, we'd like to do this if we can get it done, what you're really assigning to me and the staff is a gamble. You're asking me to project what costs are going to be and take the risk of thinking that we're going to come in under, because we have to make the commitment to Westar before the estimates are going to be known. So I'm willing to do that, but understand there's consequences in any gamble or any risk-taking like that. I think, quite frankly, that if there is a desire to underground these, this is the time to do it, obviously, when you're rebuilding the street. And so my leaning would be more to getting it done at this time. But I'm going to have some more intense discussions with Darren, Chuck, and Brandon so that, you know, I have a comfort level that my risk is not, you know, the full amount of the actual cost. And I'll have a conversation with Westar to make sure that we get the best price we possibly can to reduce that risk as well. But I'm saying that publicly so that everybody understands what kind of decision I would be making. And if that's acceptable to the commission, that's all I'll proceed. I'm sensitive to what KT indicated about no bid contracts. I think there's been a lot of time invested. And having said that, I don't wish to create a precedent with moving ahead at this particular time, but the amount of time associated with this project, technically this is not what I refer to as a major design contract for a project. This is not a large actual project to begin with. If it were larger, I'd be more sensitive than I am, but I think knowing that East Lawrence had indicated, as well as other parts of the community, as well as this commission, that they wanted to proceed with a skinny down project, and they wanted to move this along, and they wanted to get this done, I kind of yielded to the staff's decision to move ahead with the engineering firm that had been doing the work. So technically, I'm not sure that you have to bid professional services like a hard construction contract. I think it's desirable to do that and would be my preference. But I think we're a long way down the road with this one. The unusual part of this is that the engineering firm had a relationship with El Dorado, not necessarily with us. They were a sub to El Dorado, who was a contractor with us, and I think probably the Art Center as well. So that's where we're at with that.
I've just got something to add to that on the engineering part of it. The actual engineering cost is based on a percentage of the project, and it's an 8%. It's an 8% of the project total, and that is within our requirements for engineering design. Is it not, Chuck? Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's continue on with public comment. Just come to the microphone and say your name and sign in.
I'm Sarah Bishop. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Lawrence Art Center. Good evening, Commissioners. I just wanted to share a few thoughts about the proposal, which I know continues to be very controversial. I can only say that Porter and I met to try to put together a very, very loose and open structure that would allow for public engagement. So really there's no art content written into this proposal. It's just a design of a way to engage the community. So you'll see that each round of the proposal, so there's 3 rounds of artists, and that each round includes at least 2 public meetings. One for the community to come and give feedback about the selection process of the artists involved, and then another for the selected artists to then present their projects before they are carried out to the public and get feedback from the public on those projects. So it was just an attempt to try to provide a loose structure for a way to really engage our community, including East Lawrence and Elna, because we know that they really want to participate, and we really do care about that and how much they really want to be engaged and involved. I do think that Art Place has been very clear with us that it's very important that this project be about healing and moving our community forward, and that's certainly something that the Art Center cares about very deeply. At the same time, we really do want to see this money invested in our local artists. You can see that this proposal suggests that all of the money, except for administrative costs, will go to local Lawrence artists. We think that's so important. We would hate to have to see this money go back to Art Place, but of course, as you know, we are up against the 2020 horizon for Art Place, which will sunset, and we will no longer have the opportunity to use these funds. I think at this time we're really hoping that city commissioners, all of you, can help us understand whether or not this is something that you want to see move forward. Do we want to use this money here in our community? Do we want to see art related to East 9th Street in our city? One thing that I would point out is that Porter and I were very careful to phrase the proposal that you've seen so that it does not suggest that the art actually even has to be done on East 9th Street. It just has to relate to East 9th Street. So if it's a film, perhaps it's just screened in Liberty Hall, I don't know. But you could have art that's about East 9th Street, about the history of East 9th Street, the culture of East 9th Street, the neighborhood, that doesn't actually take place on the street. Also, as I think Porter was suggesting, the art can be ephemeral. It does not need to be permanent. And in fact, some of the art that was presented by our original group of East 9th Street artists was very ephemeral. For example, Zia, who does you squeeze the clay and you make your little handprint, and then she lays them out in installations, and then she hopes that people will come and pick them up and take them away with them, so that the piece sort of arises and then disappears. So pieces like that don't leave a permanent mark.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Before we go away, though, Sarah Bishop. I think what I'm hearing for the neighborhood is that they, instead of just being kind of part of the public, they want to be more of a partner in participating. So perhaps you and Porter could come up with a way that they're an actual partner to all of the steps in the process and not just at the public input decision points. I think that will really help a lot in this healing that we're talking about.
I think absolutely. Just to throw out an idea, for example, I think we could definitely reserve a space on the selection committee or several spaces for East Lawrence residents. That's just one idea. I think I'm trying to think about how to do that.
Any
I think
meeting
we're really
that
open to ideas. Yeah.
I think any meeting that you have, perhaps you might talk to ELNA who they want to have as a rep there, if they want to have a rep there at all, just to be there as a partner, I think might be good. So I think that's something that I don't want to try and spitball right now. I think that'd be good if you and Porter and ELNA come up with how they want to have more of a direct, consistent engagement rather than just decision points. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I do think, maybe on the Art Center side, feeling a little like we don't know quite how to do it so that it meets people's expectations. And we want to make sure that we're able to move forward and not just get involved in meetings that then lead to nothing.
Sure.
So if the commission could maybe suggest some ideas for how we could specifically successfully and appropriately engage East Lawrence, I think that'd be very helpful.
Well, how about me, you, and Porter, and Phil, because he's the president? We'll all have a meeting in the next week, and we'll talk about ideas that everyone has.
Yeah, I
How's
think that sounds
sound?
really great. I think that
Okay.
sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll help to be the liaison.
Thank you, Mayor Sutton.
Good evening. My name is Frank Jansen, 33, New Hampshire. You've all actually basically resolved the situation. I just want to make sure that you all knew, people who are here, you all received the letter from Dave Lowenstein, which I read earlier today. It was dated today. They received it, but the people in the audience and maybe Courtney and the others watching don't know about the letter. It's on the website. It mentions the fact that what Sarah just mentioned was you have these artists, 5 artists per year for the next 3 years, 15 artists. And they were concerned about the things that Phil and KT and even Mayor Sullivan today have mentioned, the fact that we needed more input, more cooperation, which you have just basically solved. But I want to make sure that you understood that was Dave's letter, in which he mentioned the term that was used in the letter, placemaker experiment, so he was concerned about that.
Thank you, Frank. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, well, let's bring it back to the commission. I guess we're going to have a meeting in the next week or so. I'm satisfied with that. Are you guys satisfied with what we're, the A, B, and C? Let me pull back the agenda back up. Any other comments?
But the only thing I would say is on the idea of using that $100,000 from the fiber, I would not be interested in that unless it was actually a fiber project. That's one of our priority initiatives. I want to make sure that we use whatever money we've allocated for fiber to be for fiber.
Yeah, back to the 2.5 million. I don't want to go over 2.5 million, that's for sure. I don't want to use money from the fiber pocket either.
Trouble is, Tom's not going to know what that bid's going to be on the street.
It's a tough
It's
decision.
Do you still want staff to potentially pursue burying underground, or do you want to withdraw the idea?
You ever been put in that situation before?
Oh, yeah. I make decisions about spending money all the time. You know, I'll make the call, but you just have to understand that there's a fair amount of risk associated with making that call. And as I indicated, I'll do as much due diligence about, you know, the risk that's associated with making that call before I make the call. And that's what I'm trying to point out to you. If you want to entrust me with that, understand that I may have to, you know, dip into balance reserve or something else to make that work.
Well, then, it would seem to me, Mayor, that we need to be given direction on whether or not we want the city manager to pull from other reserves to be able to bury all this stuff underground.
I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
I don't want to do that.
I think another issue there is the time frame. I mean, I guess I've never buried an electrical line in my life. I'm a little appalled that it takes 6 months to go 6 blocks. And as we look at this project, I mean, we're 4 years into rebuilding 6 blocks of road.
Yeah, just understand something. It's like a capital improvements program for Westar. This isn't in their queue right now. So, you know, I'm not sure it takes 6 months to actually bury the line, but it may take a while to get it designed, scheduled, and built into their programming themselves. I would guess that's a big part of it.
I have a little hesitation bumping up an idea that's 4 years in the making back another 6 months. I mean, it feels like this has already dragged about as slow as a road project could ever possibly drag, and we just found a way to drag it slower.
Cassie?
And I don't want to go above 2.5 million.
Okay,
Me
let's
neither.
just build a street.
Yeah.
Let's build a street.
Okay, so I guess we're withdrawing the direction,
We
not
tried.
burying.
We tried.
I guess let's say, let's build a street next year, right?
Okay, so these 3 items then, we don't have to change them now since we're withdrawing. Do we need to do these 3 individually, or should we just accept the items related, or how would you like to handle this? Okay, so I'll make the motion here to approve the following items related to East 9th Street, which is the engineering services agreement with Bartlett and West, resolution number 7220 for general obligation bonds in the amount of $2.5 million, and I guess we've received the update from the city manager's office. Any second?
Second.
All right, so motion made by Mayor Soden, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, so now we're on to public comment. Let me scroll down here. I forgot to mention that if you have a cell phone, you might put it on silent mode because it's a little disruptive when someone's at the podium talking and cell phone starts going off. Okay, so the public is allowed to speak to any items or issues that are not scheduled on the agenda after first being recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes of public comment, which we have the shot clock over there for people to watch. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss, debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments, questions to the commission. So if you have public comment of a general nature for items not on the agenda.
Good evening, Mayor, City Commissioners. My name is Bob Shum. I'm disappointed in your very last action. I worked hard to secure the grant, part of the team that secured the grant for from the Art Place group. It was thought that that could be an iconic kind of development for the city, and certainly Mayor Amix had it right. Sorry, Commissioner Amix. And you know, it becomes lesser and lesser and lesser of a project, and to not bury utilities at this point, it just seems ridiculous. I think.
Bob, we already talked about this item. This is just general public comment.
That's what I'm talking about, is a general public comment.
But this was an actual agenda item, and we had public comment on this
item. Would you allow me
item.
to finish or not?
No. So we have our actions, and then we have public comment, and then we actually take the votes. That's why I'm kind of confused that you're coming now with your public comment, which we're interested in, but now is not the time for it. You can send us a nasty email later if you like. Is there any people that have, is this about a general nature?
No.
Okay. Thank you,
Katie Wells,
Katie.
732 Rhode Island. I just wanted to thank the planning staff for taking action on the letter that I brought you all last week about the family that had been left out of the rezoning process. And apparently in a year and a half since they signed and wanted to be rezoned, they decided not to, but I just really appreciate the staff following through. So thank you.
Thank you, KT. Any other items? General public comment?
My name is Candace Davis. I live at 947 Louisiana Street, and I'm just here to briefly comment and hope that when you will incorporate the homeless committee into your mental health board when you consolidate your boards. I think that was listed on something that you're going to be talking about and discussing.
Okay, save that for future. That's on our regular agenda.
Oh, it's not. I thought it was something you were going to discuss.
This will be in our work session, which is a little further down. So just hold on and you can make that comment later.
Confusing. Okay, well, the other thing is, as the land co-chair, and that's Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods, we would like to urge the City Commission to please move forward with regulations for Airbnb. It is starting to already impact neighborhoods. It's confusing, and I believe there's a safety component to this also with the numbers of folks that sometimes are renting some of these spaces. The other thing that's just kudos, really, I want to thank Park and Recs, the department, and this is me personally, for the job that they have done throughout the community with landscaping is just gorgeous, and I really take note of that and think that brings a lot of pride to our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Candy. Any other public comment of a general nature for items not on the agenda? All right, so now we're ready to move on. This is going to be a little different because this is a work session, so we're going to kind of finish out the top part of the agenda, and then we're going to move on to the work session. So now we're going to talk about commission items. Do any commissioners have any items they wish to discuss? Okay, city manager's report.
Okay, I'll be brief. The first item on the manager's report is the Junior Olympics summary. The 17 U.S. Amateur Track and Field Hershey National Junior Olympic Championships is now in the books. It was run from July 24th through the 30th. We had 8,130 athletes, 1,422 coaches, 315 volunteers, and 20,435 spectators attend and pay admission to this event. We had 16 new records set, 10 by girls and 6 by boys. The 8,130 athletes surpassed the 2003 Junior Olympic registration hosted by Miami, which had been the standard by which JO's athletic registration numbers were compared. Several USA track and field staffers and board members commented what a wonderful event it was. And it was definitely in the top 5 of the 51 editions of the Junior Olympics. The next item is the Transit Center location analysis update. That's currently underway. The point or the goals for that study are to identify and articulate community values towards a transferred site or sites, report and confirm the information gained from meeting through presentation of conceptual designs for transfer sites, and use the information gained through the public engagement process along with logistical operational needs to develop recommended locations and site-specific designs. Once developed, these locations will be presented to the public for feedback. We've already held our first public meeting. That was held on August 3rd. We're planning a second public meeting, and that'll take place sometime the week of November 13th. We have our population, current population estimates in. The July 1, 2017 estimated population of Lawrence is now 99,496. The growth trends from 2000 to 2017 indicate that a 1.2% annual growth rate is reasonable given the city's growth history. Using this growth projection on an annualized basis, Lawrence population in 2030 would approach 115,000. In terms of the Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical Monthly Activity Report, the chief and I are in discussions regarding overtime. Overtime is running a bit high. We had some issues with not having enough extra board officers for the first 6 months, in part because they transferred to a new facility in one of the communities here in the county. And the next item is the Lawrence Citizen Survey that's being undertaken through Lawrence Police Department. We've engaged Allegro training consultants in an independent study commissioned through the City of Lawrence to determine Lawrence citizens' sense of engagement, interaction, safety, and support for the local police department. This is an anonymous survey. We're using SurveyMonkey to kind of analyze the data and collect the data. The survey is designed as a tool to generate ideas and insights for improved relations and law enforcement practices with the police department and citizens they serve. The survey runs from August 7th to September 15th and is accessible online. If you go to the report, you can see the address where you can access that survey. Allegro Training and Consultants will present the summary results of this study at a future City Commission meeting.
Sounds like it'll be just in time for the new police chief,
Coming on board. yeah.
October.
So on 8:15, the future agenda item for that meeting includes fair housing report, sign cone revisions, vacation public hearing for a 20-foot utility easement on Nicholas Drive, and a Walmart right-in, right-out access from 6th Street. I'm pretty confident we'll have a few more items by then as well. The September 12th work session is going to have an OpenGov presentation and public access to finance data. And the second item will be an update on liquor licenses and how they're enforced, the state's role and our local role, and what we can and can't do. This was a request by Mayor Soden, and so you'll hear some staff reports. I've asked staff to invite somebody from the state liquor division as well. So
Thank you.
that's it.
Okay, so now we're on to calendar. It sounded like there might be a potential meeting we need to add to the commission. You were talking about before this meeting started.
You talk about meeting tomorrow night?
No, here at City Hall. Is that the one?
It's
that's
tomorrow night, 5:30.
Yeah.
I don't know why anyone else would be
Yeah.
here for that, though.
Okay. So just you two then are going. Okay, any other calendar items then?
What meeting is it, Mayor?
It's for candidates for the
Candidates.
city commission, so
Oh.
unless you're throwing your name back in the ring, Mike.
It's too late, Mike.
Just so everybody knows, we're conducting a staff orientation. What staff does, how we interact with the city commission for all the new candidates. It's a fairly common practice in cities across the country to run an orientation, and so we think that would be helpful for persons that have made it past the primary to hear how we interact with the commissioners, and so we're inviting them all in to have that conversation.
Okay, any other calendar items? So then technically, we're gonna adjourn.
Mayor, excuse me.
Yes.
There is one item that we were requesting some feedback on. There was some requests from the school district and Douglas County related to some joint meetings.
Oh, okay.
And there's a memo that's in your packet about it. But the school district had contacted the city and had requested a meeting of all three bodies, the school district, the city, and the county, in a joint meeting. Their desire was to meet sometime in the fall before the elections, and then again after the first of the year. And then there was also requests from Douglas County suggesting a joint city-county meeting. And they had requested to meet in August. Staff was suggesting that, given the topics that are probably to be discussed, that it may be best to schedule that at a time after the election when the new commission is seated. So we just wanted, if there was any feedback that you all had, and if you give us direction, we could work with the bodies to set a time that may work.
Any input on that?
I think it'd be good to wait on the meeting with the county. I think that's a reasonable suggestion from staff, and I concur with it. That I don't really have an opinion on the joint meeting with the school board and the county.
I think that the school board is probably interested in meeting before they get into their full school year. That's what they're trying to gear up for. Yeah, we're running out of time, so.
Unless we're gonna hold it next week.
Yeah. Why don't we, and it's always interesting schedule with three different governing bodies and trying to get everybody in place for that, so. We try to do it as soon as we can, August, September. But trying to do two of them was another complication with adding the county to it.
So the city-county meeting obviously has budget implications, but not so much for next year, but long-term.
Long-term.
Okay.
So I would be
So I would-
interested in
yeah.
that one, like in January.
Yeah, I think
January, late January.
All right.
February.
Is there some concurrence? When would you like it?
Oh, whenever.
Is January good for you?
Third week. Doesn't matter.
You're going to forget, you're going to show up anyways, aren't you?
I'll be there.
We'll
They're
pick you up.
Open meetings, right?
And if it's all right with you, we'll try and get back with the school and the county as to the tri-party meeting and see if we can't work out some dates. We'll probably do a Survey Monkey to find out if we can get, some dates that work for everybody. Fair enough?
That works.
All right, thanks.
Any other items before we adjourn?
We may need to add, if we're going to ring a bell Saturday, we might need to add that to the calendar, if 3 of us show up there. I suppose that's a public invite event anyway, but
Remind me what that is again.
for the farmer's market.
The
and
farmer's market.
They didn't say that, but it opens at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, so I'd assume just before 7 a.m.
1 till.
Tell however long it takes you to ring a bell.
It's a pretty quick event.
Okay, any other items before we adjourn? Would someone like to move we adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Amick, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, so technically we're adjourned, but now we move on to the work session. The work session is slightly different because we don't actually have actions that we vote on. That's why we adjourn and then move on to this. This is more for open discussion and dialogue for broader topics. Oh, we have a nice box here. So yeah, we still have public comment, and that's still limited to 3 minutes. So tonight, advisory boards. Big topic.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. As you recall, in your strategic plan that you adopted earlier this year, you had an initiative that you created, and the initiative had to do with reviewing advisory boards. Specifically, to inventory and evaluate the role of existing advisory boards and commissions and identify opportunities to consolidate or sunset as appropriate and adopt consistent operating guidelines. So this evening, staff has prepared a lot of information for you and hopefully to facilitate your discussion on this issue. And we're asking that you provide some general direction. There's not any formal action, of course, this evening, but you might provide us some direction regarding things you'd like to see as possible future formal action that you might consider. I want to recognize, before I get into some of the work that was done, the people that were involved in putting all of this information together. The staff that was assigned to work on this initiative, in particular, included myself and Bobby from the City Manager's Office, Eliza Bittinger from the legal staff, Danielle Bushcutter from the City Manager's Office, and Eileen Horn, the Sustainability Coordinator. We also had all of the staff liaisons to all these boards assist us in a meeting that we held with them to provide input, gather input from them, and bounce ideas off of them. They also reviewed documents before they came here to you. I also want to take the opportunity to thank all of the advisory board members. I know we have a lot of them in the audience here this evening, and the city receives countless hours of work from these volunteers, and we certainly wanted to acknowledge their work. Also wanted to explain how we shared this information with the advisory boards. We did provide a couple of weeks ago the information that you have before you in terms of our staff memo in the presentation, and we provided that for informational purposes and informed them of this meeting and encouraged their participation if they would wish to. However, we did not take what you have before you to any of the advisory boards in advance, and that was by design. Our intention was to bring it first to you all to receive direction that you may have on this topic, and then we can go from there at that point. One of the things that is in your packet is a fairly detailed matrix of all of the different advisory boards. That was one of the inventory pieces that you had asked staff to put together. So there's background information on all the boards to which the City Commission makes appointments, and also governing boards and joint boards and steering committees. So there are 44 different boards and commissions that are listed on this sheet. And we do, by the way, have some extra copies of the matrix in case people had some difficulty reading it online. I know it's a lot of information, so those are located up here on the corner of the desk if anyone would like one. But on that matrix, you have a lot of details about each of these boards, hopefully provided in some amount of standard format so that you can kind of compare and contrast each of these boards as you look at them. Some of the boards are required by state law, and there are quite a few, majority of them though, that have been created in an advisory capacity by the City Commission over the years in order to look at a certain topic or provide input regarding certain issues. So there's quite a history with these boards going back a number of years to some that have been created somewhat recently. One of the things in our review of the board discussion is that there hasn't been any formal policy created by the city related to advisory boards, and there's been a lot of practice over the years regarding how appointments are made. And a lot of times the ordinance or resolution that creates these boards specifies that, but we thought it may be helpful for the City Commission to consider an overarching policy related to advisory boards, and so staff has drafted one for your consideration, and that is also in your packet. A lot of what is included in this draft policy does reflect current practices that haven't been formalized. So there's not anything perhaps written down, but it's more the way that we have advised on this over the years, or what has been kind of the standard practice. There are several new proposed additions. So as I go through kind of the highlights of the policy, I'll try and point those out. So one is setting forth a goal of enhanced diversity on the boards and committees that would be reflective of the diversity in the community. This goal would be in line with the star rating program where the city is involved, and this goal, and in setting this as part of the policy, it would help the city to meet this goal in the star rating, which we didn't meet this last round. And so it was suggested to include this here along with a statement by the city about diversity, and that would require some surveying of advisory board members from time to time to provide that information to the commission. The second element of the policy is that it clarifies that a partial term does not count toward any terms that may be capped with term limits. And I'll get into talking about term limits here in a minute, but generally our practice has been if someone vacates an advisory board position in the middle of their term, the person that's appointed then to that remainder of the term, that partial term doesn't count toward the terms for the term limit purposes. We did put in the policy a requirement of orientation of board members by staff liaisons, and I know a lot of this happens now. This just formalizes it. We also included a process by which excessive absences by advisory board or committee members could be addressed by the committee. This would be something that was new, but when we looked at other policies from other communities, this was a standard piece that is considered. There's a portion of the policy that requires bylaws come to the commission for approval, and this has been a general practice, but again, it hasn't been standardized, so this would be including that formally. There's a portion that formalizes that all boards and committees should have an email list and a portion of a presence on the website where we're posting agendas and minutes and things like that. And again, while that has been the general practice, we may not have all of them having an email distribution list. So this would standardize that. And then one of the new things that we are recommending with the policy is a requirement that regular or part-time employees could not serve as voting members on boards in order to avoid a potential conflict of interest. So we do have several cases where existing city employees are serving on voting positions on the boards, and from time to time that can create a conflict of interest with their other role at the city. And so we are suggesting this would be something new. The policy is drafted just said city employees, and someone pointed out in the feedback to us that we probably didn't intend to include temporary part-time employees, such as someone who is serving as a referee for Parks and Recreation. So we would recommend, if you want this to come back before you, that we include regular full-time and part-time employees in the language. We also provided a mechanism whereby the city employees who are currently serving in these roles would continue to serve out their current term, but just would not be eligible for reappointment. And then the final element is I know that some boards provide opportunity for the public to comment at their meetings, some boards do not. This policy would require the opportunity for the public comment to be extended at advisory board meetings in order to encourage public engagement. The term limit issue is one that the commission has discussed. You had some general discussion amongst yourself when you were talking about this initiative. And so, if you wish to include a blanket policy on term limits, we think that this policy would be where to place that guidance. With regard to term limits, really there's a lack of consistency across the board. So if you looked at the matrix, there are some of the boards that have term limits and some that don't. So some of the pros with including term limits would be helping to promote diversity of opinions and ideas and maximize the number of people that are involved with local government. But on the flip side, term limits can also cause a challenge because you might have a loss of experience of people who've been on a board for a number of years, and you might also have a possible challenge finding qualified board members, depending on how the criteria of that particular board member is set forth. And we kind of give an example of that with the trade boards. So these are very specialized positions that require certain licenses, and so you are zoning into a very small number of people relatively who may be eligible to serve versus the entire population, which is the case with a lot of the advisory board positions. So that would be something that we would encourage the commission to discuss and provide us some direction as to whether you want to consider that and whether you want to consider the policy.
Diane, I got a question.
Yes.
Did staff discuss city residents or county residents, some kind of resident requirement or residency requirement?
We did include in the policy, and I should have mentioned that, some language that requires an appointee be either someone who lives within the city or has a business within the city. And again, that would be something that you may want to discuss. I know we don't have strong consistency on that issue either. Before I get into some of the recommendations then that staff came up with here for you this evening. I did want to say that in making these, we really tried to have an eye toward efficiency and effectiveness, which we thought was kind of the overall goal that you all were looking for there. We certainly do not mean in any way to disparage the work of any of these boards as we make these recommendations to you this evening. We know that everyone works very hard. We have several boards that we recommend consideration for consolidation, and that includes the Joint Economic Development Council, the JEDC, and the Public Incentive Review Committee. It appeared to us that both of those boards had similar subject areas in economic development, and really when you look at the purpose of each of the boards, they have a lot of similarities with regard to purpose. Our thought is that the JEDC could be folded into the existing Public Incentive Review Committee that currently has representation from the school district and the county. The only function that JEDC performs in addition to the Public Incentive Review Committee is currently the receipt of the annual Chamber Economic Development request, which we think could be handled by the Public Incentive Review Committee.
Is there a city recommendation for how members, if we go forth with the consolidation, for how members are chosen who are removed from the board? I mean, with that first one, I know you're talking about one as a committee of 7 and one as a committee of 13. Presumably, we're not going to merge them as a committee of 20. So is there a selection process there?
Great question, Commissioner. I think that with regard to some of these boards, for example, this one as an example, I think our recommendation would be just to do away with the JEDC and have the Public Incentive Review Committee stand. They do have the public, general public representation on that board as well. However, as we get into the other ones, where we really are trying to merge two different boards that may have varying functions, there may be some additional details that would need to come back because of just the issue that you indicate. So we have not proceeded to that point, and you bring up a great point on all this that I should have mentioned, that if you give us the green light on these items, there's a lot of steps that are still required to bring back in front of you for formal action and considerations, just like you mentioned, Commissioner. The other one is Lawrence Alliance and Human Relations Commission. Again, both of these have responsibilities and purposes relating to anti-discrimination, and we think that in this case, the Lawrence Alliance could be folded into the current Human Relations Commission. We have a couple of funding boards that really look at making funding recommendations that align with the budget process or other funding that you all set forth in the budget process. Two of these are the Social Services Funding Advisory Board and the Transient Guest Tax Program Advisory Board. So we suggest that they could be consolidated in some way. And continuing the consolidations, we have a number of code appeals boards. The purpose of these boards is to review these very technical codes and then also make decisions related to administering those and providing recommendations to the commission. Currently, these are 6 separate boards, and we believe that we may be able to create one board that includes representation from each of these areas, and that would enhance efficiency for the staff involved and likely the work of the boards. The last one on the list of proposed consolidations is Parks and Recreation Advisory Board and the Lawrence Cultural Arts Commission. So in a number of communities, there's a lot of synergy between recreational activities, particularly related to the performance component of recreation activities, and arts and culture and that function in a community. So that could be one that would be looked at, and that might be an example of one where we definitely have different functions of those boards and how exactly they might merge together and the requirements of the board members and that kind of thing would be a subject of additional discussion, I think. Then we had several recommendations for eliminations as a standing advisory board. So one of those is the Sister City Advisory Board. This is a very unique board because it is the only one that I'm aware of that has its own 501c3 status. So they really are their own organization that is separate from the city. We believe that this structure may serve the Sister City group well. In not being an official advisory board of the city, we understand that they have a very important function and that the sister cities' relationships are extremely important. So we would recommend, if you proceed with this, that there still be a city liaison and a strong connection between the city and the board in the future. The others on the list include the Community Development Advisory Committee. So the CDAC is one that makes recommendations to you related to community development block grant, CDBG, and home funds that are received from the city by the federal government. And so this is a pot of money that has dwindled significantly over the years. This is a committee that receives some recommendations from staff, and then they make their recommendations onto you. In many communities, staff directly provides those recommendations for funding directly to the governing body. That's what we would suggest could happen in this case. If this particular committee would be eliminated, staff could absorb that, and you all would still continue to make the final decision on any funding, just like you do currently. If perhaps that is not acceptable, another concept might be to somehow fold that into the funding boards that I mentioned previously.
Currently, the CD Community Development Advisory Committee has people that serve on that come from specific neighborhoods. They have a certain criteria they have to meet. So would we not be missing an opportunity if we were to eliminate this board without folding it in somewhere else? Would we not, we would be losing that opportunity to have representation from those affected areas, right?
Could be from that perspective, although, I would say that certainly during any of the budget deliberations, there's adequate opportunity for the public to comment. So it certainly wouldn't be without the ability for people to comment on those recommendations or that funding. It just may be thought of differently. So again, these are suggestions, for you all to discuss. The last one on this list, the next one on this list is the Homeless Issues Advisory Committee. This has been a committee that was extremely active several years ago, but they have reduced their number of meetings quite significantly over the last few years, and they are currently meeting quarterly. And over the past several years, they have been receiving reports from staff and the different agencies involved with homeless affairs, but have not really forwarded any new recommendations to the commission. This is one that we suggest could be eliminated, and in the future, if the commission had a particular desire to have some focus on this area, that could be an opportunity for a task force to be created, and there may be some other opportunities to roll some of these issues into some of the existing boards, as I think one of the citizens had mentioned. The Sales Tax Audit Committee is the last one on the list of recommended eliminations. This is a committee that we would recommend continue to stay in place with the current sales tax that was authorized by the voters. This committee was specifically derived from those sales taxes and setting that process up. So we are recommending, though, if the new sales taxes are authorized, the renewal of the current sales taxes, that the Sales Tax Audit Committee would not function any longer, and that function could be absorbed by staff. and making recommendations and reports directly to the City Commission. As you know, those reports that are reviewed by the Sales Tax Audit Committee are anyway provided to you all. And our intention would be to continue to provide a great amount of transparency and accountability directly to the public and then directly to you in terms of providing those reports. So that is also a consideration for you. And then we had a couple of boards that really are obsolete in that they have not been meeting. There are no appointees to these boards, but in reviewing the city code, we found 3 of these boards which we are recommending some action be taken in a formal way to take them off of the books, so to speak. The Lawrence Advisory Board on University Student Issues, the Downtown Parking Advisory Board, and the Eco Squared Commission. And in talking with the county, we understand that the Eco Squared Commission was one that was removed from their system several years ago. So that really covers the presentation for you this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I know I want to thank a lot of the staff liaisons who are here this evening, who will also be able to help me answer it by directly answering any technical questions that you might have that I'm not aware of.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate all of the work that went into this. So it looks like we would be, assuming that we went ahead and went along with this, we'd be going from 44 to 32 boards. Okay, so is there any questions for staff?
Mayor? Nope. A couple of them. On the Code Appeals boards, the recommendation of combining all of those boards, do you envision that that would be set up so that we would have representatives from each one of the specific boards that exist now, but also that was there anything in the code that we've adopted that says that certain ones of these boards have to remain in place?
There are specific sections of the adopted codes that do relate to the boards. And so that would be something that if you give us direction on, we would have to bring back that action to amend that accordingly. And our vision in talking about it as staff, and any of the other staff can chime in, would be to retain the expertise that is represented from each of those boards. That would be very important to do.
Okay. One other question has to do with Sister Cities Advisory Board. It's something that I think is pretty important. In fact, I think it's very important, especially when you look at the relationships that have happened because of the board in boards both in Germany and Heretka and Idiatis. Obviously, you know, there's relationships that have happened just because of our tie with all of this. One of the things that I would ask if we can do, and if the commission would be agreeable, if the decision was made to allow the Sister City Advisory Board to be a board unto itself, can we contract with them? You know, I know that we would have a liaison member of, you know, staff or whoever it may be, or a member of the commission, whoever, but is there a way to contract with them to show our continued commitment? I don't want people, let's say, on the other side of the water to see that, you know, the city's not committed. I want to make sure that everybody understands it is our commitment to have this Sister Cities program. So if it were to happen, I would like to see some kind of relation like that. If not, I'm going to be, you know, strongly in favor of keeping that board in-house.
Yeah, that's a good point, Commissioner. We really hadn't contemplated that particular question, although I think that we could, if you say we'd like to explore proceeding with this, that's something that we could bring back, and we would agree. We certainly do not want there to be any misperception about the city's commitment to the sister cities relationships, and understand that that's very important. So there may be some other mechanisms that we could explore and recommend to you that would make sure that that stay in place.
Okay.
Some of these groups that we're talking about consolidating receive a relatively considerable amount of money from the city. In particular, I'm thinking of the Cultural Arts Commission. I believe they had about a $41,000 allocation in 2017. What sort of guarantee do we, I mean, I personally believe that $41,000 was allocated to be used specifically for art I mean, for the Cultural Arts Commission, if it's merged with Parks and Rec, I mean, what sort of transparency are we going to have there in terms of that money actually going towards its intended usage?
Well, I would say that that particular budget for the Arts Commission does relate to the very specific programs that they carry out on behalf of the city. And so that is part of your budget approval when you do approve that budget, very similar to how you authorize the recreation budget, for example, and set up the programs there. So I would say that I think that can certainly be accomplished, that those programs would remain in place. That would be one of the decisions that a commission would make, during the budget process.
With regard to the codes boards, is putting all those into one consistent with the direction that we get from the state statutes?
As far as we're aware, there's not anything with regard to state statute that would negatively affect that.
Okay.
As Commissioner Amix pointed out, many of those adopted codes do have requirements of the board, as I understand, and those would need to have some amendments that would be considered if we're moving forward with consolidating.
Okay. With regard to the JEDC and the PERC, essentially the responsibilities of the JEDC would be put into the PERC. There are fewer people on the PERC, and I believe there are 2 of us that are on that. I'm just questioning the utility of having 2 commissioners on that board to review things and then make recommendations back to this body. Is there a reason that we need to have commissioners on that if we're doing away with, 12 people or how many there are in JEDC and going to 6 of whom we're 2?
Well, I think that composition could definitely be something that you all discuss, and that's certainly a policy matter of how you want to place that. It has been there for a number of years that the mayor serves on that committee, and then there's another representative of the city commission. I think it's a lot of times it has been the vice mayor that has served in that, but that's certainly something that you all could discuss and provide direction on.
Is there a reason that we're not looking at the aviation board and the public transit?
One of the things that we noted in the memo is that with regard to looking at additional transportation-related boards, those being 2, that we kind of put them on a list of let's continue to explore that. There's a variety of federal grant implications that we would want to make sure that we're not that we are adhering to with that. And also our other thought was, because the Transportation Commission was just recently formed by the City Commission, let them have their legs a little bit, and then perhaps we could explore as we knew more information and they had a little more time to work to see if additional functions could be added to that board. That was our thought, Commissioner.
Mayor, can I? Diane, a couple questions, and again, the Sales Tax Audit Committee. I was under the impression that when we discussed that several weeks ago when we were putting together the questions that are coming forward in November for the continuation of the sales tax, I thought that we did have the discussion that we were going to continue those if the public passed, the voters passed those sales taxes. I thought we'd already had the discussion that that committee was going to remain in place.
We had a bit of that discussion as staff too. I guess we wanted to confirm that. There's certainly reasons to do that. If you had a desire to reduce the number of boards, though, this could be an opportunity.
Okay, I had thought that the commission, that we had that discussion, and we thought that it was pretty important, but I appreciate you bringing that back up. Second thing goes to the full-time employees and being able to serve on the various boards. As somebody who's appointed several employees, the conflicts, I know the potential's there for conflict. I don't think I've ever really heard of conflicts that have come out of these. It's, I see it as no different than a member of this body having to step away from time to time because we've placed ourselves, obviously, in potential conflicts because of the issue that comes forward. But I would have a hard time, personally, I would have a hard time turning my back on any of the employees who wants to come forward and serve. Maybe if it's something that, it's a board that was outside of, their day-to-day work. I don't know. I guess I really don't know how to explain that. But we have some really talented people that serve on, or potentially can serve on boards, but the ones that do serve now, so.
We certainly agree that our staff is extremely talented, but I think from time to time it does have the potential to create a conflict with their job when they are a voting member of an advisory board. A number of people serve as a non-voting ex officio member. That's a different role, I think, where staff is looked to lend their expertise to a particular board, but not vote. So that would be our recommendation. We see it as a potential conflict. I know in a number of other cities that's not allowed. So that would be our suggestion.
Let me chime in as well.
No.
I would say from the manager's standpoint, in dealing with employees, I find this to be a very unusual situation where we have populated advisory boards, which are typically citizens outside city employee on these boards and commissions. And sometimes they're outside the realm of their specific responsibility, but they're dealing with fellow employees serving as liaisons or other employees who come before them to testify. And I don't think that's quite frankly, an appropriate role for employees to be involved in. Now, if there was a severe shortage of candidates from the population at large and the citizenry, I would say that, maybe that would be an exception, but I don't necessarily see that as the case here. I think the point of the advisory boards is to get citizen input. And quite frankly, when we become city employees, we give up certain of our abilities to participate in certain things, including policy, political matters, and things of that sort. So I would be a bit reluctant to advocate that we continue that practice. I think you probably have gotten great service out of the employees that currently participate, but that's not the norm in cities across the country, from what I know. And I think it does put maybe not the employee that serves in the board in a conflict role, but it may cause some conflict or tension with other employees that have to come before them in terms of reviewing things and having them making recommendations. So from my standpoint as the manager, I would prefer that these boards be populated by at-large citizens that do not have ties into our employment.
I think you were talking about the language for part-time, temporary people, that is a little different, is okay. I thought that was a good compromise.
Someone had brought that to our attention that serves in that capacity, and so a lot of times the way we word something is regular part-time, regular full-time. So that would be our suggestion if this policy comes back before you, to change that to read that way.
And then last thing, Mayor, Vice Mayor, I appreciate you bringing up about the PERC committee and the mayor and the vice mayor currently serving on PERC. It never did feel right to me serving in the mayor's position to listen to the item come before PERC, pass judgment on an item or pass recommendation forward to the commission. And hell, I turn around and serve, in the seat up here and, you're hearing it all again rather than truly getting a citizens input board, as that extra set of eyes that are looking at any item that comes forward. So I would definitely be somebody that would be supportive of not having a member of this body sitting on the Public Incentive Review Committee.
And on that note, talking about getting members of the public, our public at large, their eyes on these things as recommendation, I was a little shocked when I went through the matrix. I guess this wasn't something that had occurred to me as a situation we encounter a lot, but I was shocked at how many advisory boards we have that do not require city residency. I mean, I guess I took it for granted that if you're making recommendations to the Lawrence City Commission that you happen to be a resident of Lawrence, Kansas, and so that would be a column. I don't know that it's going to have any overwhelming change on a lot of our boards, but that would be something I'd be very interested in looking at. You know, as our city manager's report pointed out, we're to a tipping point now where we're about to hit 100,000 people. I think we can find qualified people that live in Lawrence, Kansas to serve on our
Perk
boards.
is definitely something a lot of people would be interested in being on.
So that residency category would be one I'd be interested in seeing some uniformity.
I'm curious that you both were talking about having the mayor and the vice mayor on some of these. Well, we also have city commission reps. How do you feel about them not being on these advisory boards as well? Like we have the Affordable Housing Board, I think BTBC, we have one, TGT. Would they also not be serving on those boards?
I think there's a case to be made for saying that we need to have citizen involvement at that level, so that, you know, we're the arbiters at this level. And that's why my question to Diane was, you know, what's the argument for having the commissioners on these?
I just want to make sure
You
that
know,
you were
and Tom's over
including
here. I mean,
those
that's what
sides.
I'm curious
Yeah.
about. I mean,
Okay.
I think when you're making a substantial financial transfer of city funds and you're giving another board full discretion as to the expenditure of those funds, I think that's where you'll see those connections being made where the mayor pro tem, BTBC gets funding, some of the chamber boards that have authority for that kind of funding. I think that there was the argument or logic that we wanted governing board representation over there because those boards were then spending significant amounts of money, and we were really, I think, turning you more into watchdogs than as full participants in that direction. So, but I sense when you are transferring money, or not transferring, but you're putting commissioners on a board with items that come back to the board,
Exactly.
it really creates this kind of awkward position. And Mike, I hear you talk about it all the time when we talked about you were on the committee on East 9th Street. And so you're serving there with a group of people that are very focused about a particular project, and at some point, you know, you feel, I think, a certain obligation to support the findings and the recommendations, and then you go to your role as a city commissioner, and it's tough to separate yourself from that duality that has occurred between the two, and you almost have to champion the cause from the board that you sat on, or you feel like you're a bit of a, you know, a traitor, I suppose, that
Well, if
you
you
didn't do
can,
that.
excuse me, but if you can tell me how I can take a vote on the East Ninth project in one room and come into another room and change my vote, let me know. But you can't. You can't. I mean, you carry in, number one, you're representing the board that you just helped, you know, lead a project through, and then all of a sudden you may find something in here that says, man, I can't do that, but whatever.
But I think those tensions are a little bit different in situations where money's being transferred and then there's a completely independent board deciding where those funds are going to go.
let me see if I can give you examples to show if I understand what you're talking about. I serve on the Explore Lawrence board. Explore Lawrence gets about $1 million a year from the city, and that board makes decisions on how that money is going to be spent.
Exactly.
So that's one I serve on that you think I should continue to serve on, as opposed to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, where the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has no allocation. They make recommendations to the City Commission, so I'm really superfluous at that level.
I think
is that what you're saying?
That's exactly the distinction I'm trying to draw.
Okay.
And I think you do end up playing more the watchdog role when you're appointed to a board that has independent discretion on those funding decisions.
And how many of those would you say that
I
we
don't know
have?
that we have that many of them, do we? PTBC does too.
Those are listed under the governing boards.
Okay.
Transient guest tax, I'm on that, although we don't specifically allocate so much as make a recommendation.
You make a recommendation and then the commission
Right.
evaluates it. So that's
And
one
there
where
may
it could
be,
separate.
and I wish Scott hadn't stepped outside, but you may be able to answer this as well. I've been told before with the MPO that there may be some legal requirement for us to be there,
I think there is.
so.
For federal
yes.
funding, there's some requirements that there be some consideration.
Yeah.
Okay.
Governing body, just someone from the county, says it governs all that, so.
And there's MPOs all across the country, so that those appointees have
Yeah.
similarities.
Speaking about the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, one thing that I was going to suggest that we might look at is the CDBG or CDAC board, if perhaps those duties for distribution might be transferred to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, since from what I understand, most of them have to do with housing. That might be a good group to have private or public input on.
Some of them are looking at you for that answer, Scott.
I'm sorry.
CDAC.
Question, right? And I'm sorry, the question there?
So you had one before me, though, or no, you did.
All right, we got it covered. She's
Okay.
just saying merge CDAC with AHAB.
CDAC.
Well, the
perhaps
responsibilities.
The distribution responsibilities, put those into the Affordable Housing Advisory Board.
Well, you know, it's possible to merge those things. I sort of see them as distinct issues. One is very focused on strictly the affordable housing strategies, which is a part certainly of what the CDBG and home monies go toward. So there's a connection there. But whether it, I mean, you're really broadening the role of that and introducing some mixture of a number of different items. Again, I think Diane reflects the staff recommendation to take the CDAC recommendations of filtering and directing federal grant money directly to the city commission. It's an efficient way to do it. Can it be done? Yeah, it could.
Might be something to ask the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, what they think about that.
I guess an alternative would be if we wanted to continue that function outside of the staff, we could combine that with the Social Service Funding Advisory Board.
Well, and the other thing that I think, you know, one of the conflicts we have on AHAB is that some of the board members by position created would be requesters of funding. And so, same with CDBG and home monies as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of that conflict going on in terms of those two boards, I would say.
I would see it more towards the Social Service Funding Advisory Board, because, I mean, that's a similar allocation.
On a
Mayor, as the liaison to that Social Service Funding Advisory Board, one thing we might want to think about, though, is the staff expertise as far as the federal requirements associated with those CDBG and home funds.
Right.
Those requirements aren't really the same for our city social service funding. So I think we'd likely need to be relying on staff to advise that
Right.
social service funding advisory board, or whatever you would call it, pretty heavily rely on staff to guide how those funds can and
Because
can't be
it's so
allocated
technical, yeah.
pursuant to
Okay.
CDBG and home
I'm actually open to
regulations.
having staff do it. It's just, instead of going to AHAB, I thought this would be another
Yeah.
alternative.
One thing that concerns me about them not having that role at all is I feel like that's one of the few ways that we have participatory budgeting, citizen participation of budgeting. So I don't want to get rid of those small ways that we actually have that, where we have a group that's able to sit down and decide. So I'm really concerned about that part of it.
On a similar note, on the transient guest tax, that's a board that I serve as the city commission representative on. I would think one of the cries from the community we may hear if we merge TGT with social service funding is that as it stands right now, Transient Guest Tax Board is made up of several hotel industry individuals, and that was their, obviously their request that the hotel industry generates this money. And so ultimately they like having at least that notion that they can have a say in how the city spends the money that they generated. Obviously, a merger with Social Service Funding Advisory Board is, I would think, going to result in the elimination of some I don't think that we're going to have the same level of hotel involvement if we're talking about social service agencies as we do transient guest tax. Those are, in my opinion, while I think most of the staff recommendations are pretty spot on, I think transient guest tax and social services are two completely different monsters.
One thing I was thinking about the TGT distribution is that maybe the new Arts and Culture and Parks and Rec Board could start participating in that. That would be an additional way to add participatory budgeting.
Yeah, but most of the stuff we have done through transient guest tax doesn't really fall into the purview of the Parks and Rec Department.
Or Arts and Culture.
Well, no, it has fallen under Arts and Culture considerably, but
That's what I'm saying. If those two are merged somehow to one board, then maybe that would be an interesting new thing they could do.
yeah, I think that merger has some issues as well, to be perfectly frank with
Yes,
you.
it does.
I see this as a way that Parks and Rec swallows arts and takes the 41,000, but that's just the conspiracy theorist in me.
I did want to mention that one thing that I've been hearing is that there's perhaps some kind of subtle conspiracy to perhaps remove the money from arts and culture or to backhanded fire Porter, the director of arts and culture, and there is no intent of doing anything like that. I think everyone needs to hear that. I advocated for Porter's position. I advocated for keeping Porter last year as well. So this idea that I would be taking part in a conspiracy to somehow, get rid of him or disempower arts and culture is just...
I'm not talking about Porter, I'm talking about arts and culture as a whole.
No, but that gave me the opportunity to perhaps let people know that's watching there is no conspiracy going on to get rid of Porter. I think Porter does a great job. Thank you, Porter.
Thank you.
But yeah, that is an issue if those two boards are merged, is how they would perhaps empower each other rather than sweeping in and perhaps taking one or the other over. That would be a devil in the details. I guess I had another thing that I wanted to point out. So it looks like we've already discussed the full-time employees, part-time employees, term limits. You wanted some discussion on that, perhaps? You were looking for that?
Only if there's a desire that the commission has to standardize that. As it's pointed out, there are some that have term limits now, some that don't. Those are already set up and working. But if you wanted to say our policy is to have term limits, then I think that discussion needs to be had, and then we would put that in the policy is what we're suggesting.
Yeah. I'm interested in term limits.
I think we need to have a default of term limits and then have stated exceptions as needed. Because, with regard with the code boards, we have a limited pool of applicants, and we need qualified applicants. So I think the default would be we'd have term limits and then we'd have stated exceptions.
Mike, how do you feel about term limits?
I don't feel very good about them. It's just me thinking out loud.
There is a subtle irony there that a group without term limits is talking about implementing term limits on others, but...
Well, people can limit our terms if they want to, Matthew.
Well, and we can limit the terms of advisor. The mayor appoints the board, so you can, a term limit is as simple as not reappointing someone.
And but I can tell you, as being someone that's had to sit in this seat and make those reappointments or not appointments, or it's just, that gets into serious personal nuances, diplomacy. It's to somehow say to someone, okay, your time is up. You do a great job, but your time is up. That is a really difficult scenario to be in. And I'm sure there's people in this room right now that have had to listen to me do that or not wanted me to take someone off the board that's been on it, for 8, 10 years. But, from what I hear from other commissioners, we need fresh blood in a lot of places. So that has been actually probably one of the more personally difficult things I've had issues with. The other thing that, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
I'm interested in terms with the stated exceptions.
The other topic that I heard Diane mention that she wanted some discussion on before, we'll go into public comment next, was about the residency requirements. How does the commission feel about that?
I'm a big advocate.
Yes.
I think whenever possible, we should, it should be required city residency. I did like the idea, though, that Diane brought up about, and I can't remember which board it was, or just the discussion about was either that or in the cases that there just doesn't have a person that exists, maybe we have the caveat that you have to own a business or something in Lawrence, Kansas. There has to be a commitment there, so I did like that. Because I know that there's going to be times in finding expertise in some kind of position that you may not be able to find it. So,
I guess another thing, policy might be to talk about the role of commissioners, city commissioners on these boards, to reflect, what we were talking about, where we have a significant allocation of funds to a group that's going to be spending those, like Explore Lawrence. We need commissioners on those, but we're going to step back from the ones that are giving advice to this. I'd like to see if we can figure that out so we can wrap this into this policy. And I think it puts us in a difficult position to be on the perk, hear the presentation, vote, and then come here and try it again. And that's my, so I'd like to step back from those boards and have the commission step back.
that's fine.
So if we kind of go line by line, those boards would be, let's see here.
Be affordable housing.
So you'd want to be removed from affordable housing?
Yeah, I think so. Because, those decisions come back here.
Okay. Removed from PERC?
Yeah.
Okay. What about my position on transient guest tax?
That's similar where the recommendation comes back to this body.
Okay.
ETBC.
Yeah, I was worried about,
Well, they get
No
200,000, 300,000.
oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I
but
thought
they
we
don't
were
have
on this
anything that comes back here, do
CJCC.
they?
Well, you'd need to be on that
Yeah.
if they get 300,000,
Yeah.
right?
TBC.
I think Lisa's arguing that,
Yeah.
that
Need to be on there.
Yeah, you need to be on.
a governing board member would be on there.
I was looking at the CJCC, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. That's we have the chief of the police, the municipal judge, me, and
That's
of
a
course
county
you're
board.
ex officio.
Yeah, it's a county board.
That's a
though.
county board.
That's,
Yeah.
So, well, how do you feel about that is what I'm asking.
It doesn't the county the one who
It's
decides?
not really our play.
Yeah,
Not really,
it's
yeah.
the county's job to.
So I get to stay on that?
Okay.
Well, I would say just because it's the county board, they can't dictate
Yeah.
that the mayor
Well, I-
serves on their board. That's kind of a negotiation.
Well, I'm not there because I'm the mayor. I'm there because that's something that I'm extremely interested in. I'm not speaking in.
So does it say as a commissioner?
I believe so.
Is that the
It says
designation?
City Commission representative.
Yeah.
I guess
'Cause
I'm
I've
not
always
that
been on it.
familiar. Are they making recommendations to this board, to this commission?
Well, we did for the police stuff, but they kind of went to you rather than directly coming to us. So I'm not sure how that would be. I'm curious what you think about that, me staying on that then.
Oh, I
You
think
vote.
it's a good
I
idea
love
for it.
Do you vote? Are you a
We don't
voter?
really vote on those kinds of items. We vote on minutes. No, not really. It's
That-
more of a very big discussion. That's something I think to look at a little closer, because it's not a typical advisory board, I guess.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I've heard that the county intends to pursue and fund the mental health related issues and the affordable housing issues. I think there's this kind of unwritten understanding that the affordable housing issues redound to the city, and the mental health, judicial system diversion programs are over on the county side.
Mhm. I think we were adding it to the municipal side as well. And then, of course, the police, we're looking at perhaps changing the initial contact forms with people, and there's a lot of stuff that's being changed, but it doesn't sound like the same kind of distribution of funds that we're talking about for transient guest tax.
And aren't the contact forms changing in part to have some consistency in statistical reporting and analysis that way?
Yeah, we're looking to add more demographics to it. My big one is if who they're talking to, if the individual is a student. Of course, race is a big one. So that might be one that you might want to look at more, if that would be appropriate for a commissioner to continue on that as a voting member. Did we finish going down the list?
No, we still have Horizon 2020 by 2020.
Just a couple of more meetings, perhaps, depending on where the committee takes itself.
But I think we decided the other day that I'll never get a vote on that, so it doesn't matter.
It'll be hindsight.
Review mirror 2020.
That's right.
I think we figured out that, Lisa, you and I cannot escape the MPO. So we will stick around for that. And I believe that is it then, right? Nope. We said explore Lawrence. Stuart, you thought that was a good one to stay on as kind of a watchdog?
Yeah.
Okay, DMI.
I think I can go off of that.
Okay. Peasley Tech.
It's not a bad position to be in. Have a representative of this board, because we have
Well, they get
Diane as
money.
ex officio.
They're spending money.
Okay.
Yep.
And then EDC.
I think it's safe for me to come off of that.
What's that?
Well,
EDC?
Yeah.
Well, they get
But I'm ex-
That's $220,000.
That's, yeah, it's ex officio.
Well, I'm ex officio, though. I'm not a voting member now.
Yeah, but you gotta watch it.
And those are obsolete. Okay, are we ready for public comment? Any other final questions to staff? Okay, so just come up to the microphone, say your name, sign in, and tell us what you think about all these advisory board changes.
Hello, I am Stephen Davis. I have, since January, I've had the privilege of serving on the Social Service Funding Advisory Board, which is something I've really been honored to do for the people of Lawrence. Based on that experience, I just have some general observations and suggestions, and then a few things that are specific to that board. I'd like to start out by saying that the city staff does an excellent job. Specifically, Danielle and Casey have been a huge help. They've made our job so much easier. With respect to the suggestions that have come before you today, I think that consistent bylaws would be very important. It's important for each committee to know specifically what powers they have been delegated and which ones are reserved by the commission. The selection of the chair is something specifically that might be addressed. In some cases, that may be an appointment by the mayor or an election by the board themselves. The absence policy, I think, is critical. We had, I know last year, a couple of instances where the PTAC met and didn't have a quorum. That is a huge waste of taxpayer resources. So I think absences need to be considered, and there needs to be a clear policy from the city and then from the boards. With respect to public comment, I would be thrilled if more public members of the public showed up to our meetings. When they do, we are thrilled to hear from them. But I certainly understand having an official explanation, and then hopefully people know that when they come to our meeting, of course, we're happy to talk with them. It's usually pretty quiet anyway. For those who aren't familiar, the Social Service Funding Advisory Board is 7 members. 6 are at-large members appointed from the City of Lawrence. The remaining is a representative of the United Way of Lawrence and Douglas County. In this past year, or rather for the next fiscal year, we had $2.2 million in requests from nonprofits and social service agencies across the city and the county. From that, we had $1.3 million to allocate, so that was almost $1 million of requests from very worthy charities that we did have to turn down. So the job is difficult, but it's something that I've been very privileged to do. One thing that has come before you that I'd like to oppose is the combination of the Social Service Board and the Transient Guest Tax Board. I believe that although on the surface both boards do provide recommendations for spending, I think we also provide a certain level of public confidence in those recommendations. When those social service agencies come to our board, they know that we have a United Way representative and that we have members of the public who are invested in social services. Similarly, when people go to the transient guest tax, they know that those members of the hotel industry are there and have their best interests at heart as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for helping to winnow down $1 million. That's not a easy chair to sit in either. Any other public comment?
Good evening. My name is Bobby Flory, and I'm with the Lawrence Home Builders Association. This is great that you're working on this. I had no idea there were that many boards in the city and was kind of shocked by it. But I agree with your efforts to try to establish some policy that has consistency and the things you mentioned, term limits, path of application, absentee policy, and city employees not serving as voting members on these boards. In fact, there was in a electrical board meeting, I think, there was an issue that came up and the vote went 3-2, and one of the persons voting was a city employee, so that made a difference. But anyway, I also want to say that I appreciate your effort to consolidate these boards. However, the building code boards are very technical. And I notice, I attend a lot of these meetings. In fact, sometimes I feel like I am on these boards, but I don't serve on any of them. I just go to all of them. I notice that the people that serve on these all bring different perspectives. They don't all come in with the same backgrounds and areas that they perform in that particular trade. And so it's always interesting to me to hear the different perspectives they offer and the discussions that occur. I think if you move to consolidating that, and for example, you have, again, one electrician on a consolidated board, an electrical code issue comes up, the other board members are basically voting on something that they don't have a technical expertise in. So they are either looking towards that one person on the board who does have that expertise, or they're looking to the staff person for direction, and that concerns me. I also want to say that I think there's a benefit to our staff liaisons that serve on these boards or that work with these boards. They get to hear the discussion on various code issues that are in a forum that does not have a particular project on the table, or they're not standing out on a job site to learn about that code. So I think the discussion is very objective and very positive, and I think our staff also learns from listening to some of these tradespeople talk about the issues that are going on. Typically, the discussions, the meetings are around our code adoption. That's when they meet pretty intensely. And really, I just have some great concerns about people forwarding recommendations to you on codes that they really don't have the technical expertise in. But again, do very much appreciate your effort and what you're doing, and I'm not saying that it wouldn't work, just saying be cautious as you consolidate these boards.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you.
Good evening again, Mayor, City Commissioners. My name is Bob Shum. I'm the chair of the Lawrence Sister Cities Advisory Board. I have tonight at the meeting 4 other board members, if you raise your hand, please. And we're here to inform you of our activities and the longevity that this group has had in the community and its success. We're in our 28th year of a relationship with Eutin, Germany. We're in our 27th year with Hrvatska and our 8th year of Iniades. totaling 63 years of international exchange and cooperation. We've had 2,000 plus exchanges with the city of Waiteen, going back and forth, both groups of citizens, Germans and United States. Over 1,000 with Hradska, and over 300 with Indiades, which totals more than 3,300 people have been the benefit of our organization in terms of exchanges and getting to know one another and understanding each other's cultures. As a side note, we've had 5 marriages as well. In fact, one of the marriages is right here in one of our board members. So there's unlimited benefits to our organization. So anyway, we have a couple concerns about not being affiliated in a formal fashion with the city. First of all, we have a number of formal agreements that have been signed over the years with dignitaries from our corresponding cities in Japan, Germany, and Greece. We don't know what they would think about and how they would understand a disassociation with the city in some way, no matter how small. Different cultures and different organizations have different misunderstandings or understandings of how things work. For instance, in Hradska, they have an entire department, the Friends of Lawrence, in the City Hall. It's a separate department just to facilitate their relationship with us. That's how strong they look at this. One of the things that's been brought up is that we are a 501c3 corporation because we do fundraising and we do sponsor scholarships. We have, that's for ease of contribution to our organization, and then we can turn around and give out the scholarships. We estimate that since 2000, we have provided more than 80 scholarships to children of the city that wouldn't be able to afford to go on an exchange trip, and that number totals somewhere around $50,000. For a long time, we were only getting applications to go on these exchanges from Southwest Junior High, and we were noticing there wasn't any coming in from Central, and so we thought as a board we have to do something about that.
Coming up to 3 minutes. Sorry. Keep going.
Well, okay. Anyway, so we've set to the task of raising money, and we've been successful with that, and we've been able to become more diverse and having more of the children across the broad spectrum of the city to be able to exchange. And my last wrap up here, in conclusion, we don't see the need for a change, and if you think about it, if you're going to still provide a staff liaison, we're still going to have some kind of relationship with the city. And if we talked to staff today or yesterday about funding, and the funding is seen not going away, we understand the need for a change because it's going to look like a lot like what it is right now, but yet in the eyes of contributors to the scholarship fund and in the eyes of our foreign counterparts, they may find it a significant change. So I guess we would ask you to please consider to leave us where we are. We feel like we've been very successful and we've represented the city well, and we've got a great track record. So we hope that you'll consider that in your final determination.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Any
Mayor,
questions?
could I ask?
Go ahead.
Bob, do you have a fundraiser going on right now?
Do what?
Do you have a fundraiser going on right now?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Unless I'm wrong about that. I don't think we do.
We always accept.
Well,
You don't have
she's a lot better at this than I am.
That's fine.
We don't have any formal fundraising going on for scholarships at the moment.
Okay.
It's on the schedule to get to.
Well, you realize that this board is something of an anomaly because it has an independent organization, but it's still an advisory board. Which do you prize more, your affiliation with the city or your 501c3 status?
Well, the affiliation with the city is what gave us it's the genesis of our group. And we think it's just a convenience for people who want to contribute to have our own 501c3 designation. Really doesn't mean that we want to be independent. We could use the city's, we could funnel money through the city for a tax exempt, but it kind of gets difficult to do because the money has to go through the organization here, and then it has to be mailed out in terms of a check to our program, so then we can distribute it as we need to have it distributed. But we raise also through our dues, we raise a lot of money. Most of the money that we use for the promotion of this organization is raised from private sources, either through dues, fundraising, and in our scholarships as well. Thank you very much.
One more question. If as a commission we go to term limits, I think one of the concerns was with Sister Cities Advisory Board, a lot of that is relationships that you built over the years. If Sister Cities were to be an independent entity, you would obviously be exempt from those term limits. How big of an issue is the term limit?
Well, currently we have 14 board members. One spot is open due to a person who was deceased here recently. But probably about 6, I'm just going to take a wild guess right here, probably 6 have had multiple terms. And so there is a large amount of turnover. We do have, I think last time we looked, about 8 people of the 14 seats that are in their either first term or just been reappointed to a second term. So there's quite a bit of turnover. At some points, we've had trouble filling the positions a few years ago. And so, I mean, we can live with term limits. I think we're more interested in a formal relationship with the city, and we're not going to worry too much about the term limit part of that if that's what it requires.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Hello, Candace Davis, and I'm here as a social worker, and I do want to speak on behalf of combining the homeless committee and being sure that it's combined and designated under the mental health board. And certainly homeless issues, are largely involved with mental health as well as addiction issues. So I would like you to be sure that there's some specificity in the wording so that homelessness is incorporated under mental health, and that's clear to others that we're not just dropping the ball on mental health. And I'm certain that we are not. I was reading the county budget, and it looks like the city, the county, has done an incredible job in attempting to coordinate the hospital, Bert Nash, the police, the judicial system in addressing many of mental health and homeless needs. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's important, that people don't think that we're just dismissing the homeless issue, that issue is still held up with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council of Affordable Housing.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Patrick Wilbur. I am a resident of Lawrence, and I live at 521 Durham Court. I'm with the Douglas County Libertarians, and I want to speak to a couple of the proposals tonight. The first is with the Community Development Advisory Committee. I was a member of that committee for about 5 years-ish, and I can tell you that that committee functions very well for the city. I think one of the reasons that the proposal has come forth to eliminate the committee is the dwindling funds, and actually I think that's a good reason to keep it. Because what we found over the course of those 5 years was it became more and more difficult to make the decisions on funding. We did it. I mean, we didn't have the budget you guys do, but we were able to, if not make everyone happy, I felt like we were fair, and I felt like we worked together very well to make sure that those funds were distributed wisely and made those recommendations to you as a body, and I think that you approved all of the ones that we recommended. So I see this, if we can track that committee, I see that as an extra burden on city staff. I see that as an extra burden on you. The other component of that is we fund neighborhood organizations quite often through the CDAC. That's somewhat unique to Lawrence as well. And I think you'll have a lot of people in here on Tuesday nights talking about that funding just like we did on our committee. So it's kind of a firewall for you guys, and I think that might be something you want to consider is to use your citizens in a positive way like that. And so if we recommend something to you, you can always reject it, but I just feel like that committee's worked very well over the course of time. One minor correction on the membership of that committee, it's not just Lodimah neighborhoods that are represented, there's also at-large members of that committee. So we have people from all around the city that serve on the CDAC, and I was proud to do that. I was also going to speak to the Sales Tax Audit Committee, but you kind of stole my thunder on that. So what I'm hearing from the commission, I believe, is that you want to retain the Sales Tax Audit Committee if any of the sales tax questions pass. What I need to know is, how do we codify that? How do we make sure that that actually happens after the election happens? Because I know it was part of the ballot question in 2009. It was actually part of the ballot question. We're doing 2 renewals out of the 3 questions. So if we do a strict renewal, I think legally we have to make sure that there is a committee involved with that. And if not legally, at least ethically. So I'll leave you with that question, and thank you for your time.
Patrick?
Yes.
I think you all were talking about that the ordinance would have, thank you.
So the sales tax audit committee is created by ordinance in our city code right now. The ordinance does, the code language does specifically talk about the 2008 sales tax initiatives. So staff would have to bring back a recommended amended ordinance that would change that date from 2008 to 2017. And then the rest of the ordinance would be, well, would be able to stand, because that's what it talks about, is the sales tax provisions. It doesn't get into the detail of what the questions are for. It just talks about the date of that election. So we'd be able to make that change, and then it would be codified.
With the conversation we've had tonight, we'll return an ordinance with that updated date in it for commission's deliberation.
Awesome. Thank you.
Patrick? Do you have an opinion on combining the CDAC with the Social Service Funding Advisory Board?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not familiar with the work of the Social Services Committee, and so I don't know if that would necessarily be a good idea or not. I do feel like the CDAC scope is a little broader maybe than people think, because we're dealing with basically 3 pots of money. We've dealt with 3 pots of money when I was on there, and there was a reference to affordable housing being part of that early, and that is a large amount of the funds. But there's also the neighborhood organizations, there's social service agencies that are involved in that, and so it would put a lot on the plate of that or of that committee if we combine those 2, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were looking at was that the timing would be at different parts of the year because of the way the social service funding could be done, so that the workload would be distributed kind of through the year rather than having the CDAC do one and then not do anything again for another year. So, I mean, that's kind of what I was looking at. And because there's some overlap on social service funding, so that's why it occurred to me. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other public comment?
Frank Jansen again, 33 New Hampshire. The hypothetical was if one of these advisory boards is either combined or eliminated, and the people in the board are really dedicated to their mission, and they go rogue and keep meeting and having discussions and recommendations to the commission. That's just a hypothetical. But what my question is, you need to verify tonight the timeline of this process, and I assume you're going to be discussing this with the boards, and how soon is this going to happen? Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Did you have a general timeline?
It was dependent on this conversation, but we'll come back with recommended legislation depending on where you want us to go with this. And, you know, if there's notification issues, we can put some transition periods right into the legislation or into the reports on how we would implement, so that it's not disruptive. Our intent is to evolve it, not necessarily, you know, go in and clean house.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Any other public comment?
So I would like to try to get something up on Elmo before the clock starts, so if you could reset that, please. I think there's a switch here that says, I can help you. There, I know it was there somewhere. Okay. Okay, this is what I want to do. Just trying to do that list out there. I don't know if I can get it. So, Zoom. I know. There. Okay. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, staff. I'm Melinda Henderson. I live in the Brick Creek neighborhood. So I'm here to speak on a few different items, and Courtney Shipley was not able to be here to ask a couple of questions, so I wonder if I might have a little extra minute or possibly more to relay her questions to the Commission. Thank you. Okay, so my first question, I got here a little late for the staff presentation on the East 9th project, but going through the matrix, I did notice that the CAC, Citizens Advisory Committee, was not on the matrix. And so then I wondered if it was addressed who, I know I was here for the LAC representative talking about having public meetings. So I didn't know if that CAC was going to be reconstituted or if there's going to be anything formal set up for that.
Go ahead and finish your public comment, and then we'll get.
Okay, that's fine. So one of Courtney's questions was where it's discussed that no city employees can be members of a board. She wanted me to ask, are city commissioners considered employees because they receive paychecks? And so listening to the discussion tonight, you know, it's clear to me that you're talking about non-elected people, but I don't know if you want to do any other kind of clarification on that particular issue. I sit on the Joint Economic Development Council, and I have been to several PERC meetings. So when I saw the idea of combining JEDC and PERC, I was quite puzzled. So I pulled out the resolutions or ordinances, whichever they are, that created the two different bodies. And under PERC duties, which is here, it's basically evaluating economic development incentives. JEDC does not do that at all. Here, they deal with the entire economic development budget. That's their main priority. And there sometimes are other issues that we'll discuss too. But I don't see any meshing at all of this. And I don't think that, and I think the chamber would agree with this. I don't think that anybody from JEDC should represent JEDC in a vote on public incentives. I think that's entirely wrong. And I'm running out of time, but if you all want to discuss that with me later, please feel free to. I think that's it. Most of my other concerns have already been covered by other people.
Thank you. So East 9th Street, that committee, didn't it have a sunset?
It did, definitely, with regard to the East 9th project. So that is, we didn't list that on the list because it's not an active committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So is there going to be another formal one or just public meetings?
I think that would be in the purview of the city commission.
Maybe one day in the future we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Thank you. And we already talked about employees that perhaps not even having commissioners as voting members on the committees.
And you all are also classified as temporary and part-time employees.
How true that is.
I think the language that I talked about was
Temporary part-time. Talk about bottom of the rung.
Any other public comment?
Steve Kelly, 4529 Broadmoor Drive, and I'm part of the staff of Lawrence Chamber EDC. I would just speak, I guess, in support of some of the recommendations made regarding the JDC and PERC. And while I appreciate the other comments about the difference in the duties, I think when you look at kind of the overall setup in terms of economic development right now, we have a chamber board and subcommittees at the chamber. We have an EDC board. We have monthly economic development partner meetings, which involve the city, the county, KU, the BTBC. There's a number of different groups that are dealing with economic development policy in a variety of ways. So I think there's amp coverage there. I think really it comes down to, is there some efficiencies gained in having this go to PERC? And then maybe expanding the roles of PERC so that they actually are reviewing and making recommendations on the budget, or not. And that's really what it comes down to. It's certainly to the will of the commission, and I think the staff did an excellent job of trying to make these combinations. But ultimately, it's up to you. But I think we could maybe gain a little efficiency because there are a lot of different levels of oversight within the chamber now with the various entities and monthly or quarterly meetings of almost all of them. So again, I stand for any questions.
Any questions for Steve? Thank you, Steve. Public comment, come on up.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, and City staff. My name is Erica Fox Zabuski. I live at 1026 Ohio Street, and I'm here as an individual or private person. However, in full disclosure, I work pro bono for an organization that has been a past recipient of the LCAC grant and is currently this year a recipient of a TGT grant. So I do want to, so I've attended a lot of meetings for both of these commissions in the past when my schedule allows. And in regards to the TGT and social services proposed melding, I find that a little quite strange. Someone else has already made comment on it, that there are very different priorities that TGT has, which are generally commercial organizations, and they're looking at sort of that kind of economic development and social services, looking at a very different kind of issues. In regards to the LCAC and the Parks and Rec, I would also like to advise against that. I think, having been to many of the LCAC meetings, their agendas are very full. I'm not quite sure how other cities have the synergy that's been proposed. I'd be interested to know what that synergy involves, but it seems that there is really plenty of work for the current Arts Commission to do, and a lot of hope is that their role will expand as the cultural plan is implemented further, and a lot of other things going on in town. Finally, I want to say that I am very relieved to hear Mayor Soden's remarks about Porter and that he is not in danger of being whittled away. We appreciate him very much. I think he's done an incredible job since being here of really bringing consensus among a very challenging group of people who all want to be heard, and I've seen him in action on a variety of meetings and just find him does a really excellent job. He represents the arts community, leads the roundtable, and is a really important voice for those of us who work in the arts, especially the nonprofit arts in town, and so we really are relieved to hear that he'll be here for a long time, we hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Any other public comment?
I'm going to sign in before I forget to do so. My name is Kate Deneen, and I am on the Lawrence Cultural Arts Commission, and I appreciate what Erica just said. We are a very busy group of people. We are all volunteers, as probably everybody on all of these various boards are. And this is something I haven't heard really addressed, is how much more work it's going to be for the volunteer
advisory committee people. This will be if all of these boards, not all of these, some of these boards are put together and we are given new tasks to do. The Cultural Arts Commission, we have Final Fridays stuff. We have, I think, 5 subcommittees that we have working on stuff year-round. So that, and I don't know exactly what the Parks and Recs group does. It would be really good to know before we started to get melded together. I don't know if you all know exactly what everybody does and all these different boards. That would be a good thing to find out before we start putting these groups together. At this point, I would advise against putting the LCAC with anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Hello again, KT Walsh, speaking only for myself. I'm so glad you're working on this. This has been talked about for years. This is great. I have some scattered thoughts. I know it's difficult to find people to volunteer. It's been a plus that now the needed advisory board members are listed on the city website and also on every city commission. I think it would also be really helpful if you put what time and days of the week the boards meet, because then you can go, oh man, I can't do that, it's Wednesday night. Or, you know, and also the volunteer column every week in the Journal World where they ask for public volunteers. Perhaps we could add it in there. Let's see. I agree with Marilyn Bittenbender about having one representative from a field on the technical boards. I've seen this present a problem when that particular person, what did I do?
It's Bobby
Floyd.
God, I'm so sorry.
We knew who you were talking about.
And I'm getting older and it's going to get worse. So anyway, but I agree with her because I've seen when that particular person with that expertise is not there, and then you don't have that person and you may have to take a vote. One of the things about the Citizens Advisory Committee for the CDAC, I believe, that deals with the federal funds for low-to-mod neighborhoods and affordable housing. One of the things about those federal requirements of having representatives from each of the 5 low-to-mod neighborhoods is that part of the reason for that, back when Lyndon Johnson started it, was to have people who'd experienced poverty and came from low-income areas. And we don't really have other boards where that's a, you know, part of the push. So you've got people who are living it, voting on it. I am very pro-bike. I sold bikes for 10 years at Sunflower Bike Shop, and I understand there may be some legal issues here, but the Bicycle Advisory Committee stands alone and apart from our transportation committees. And oftentimes, my experience is that they have a little bit of tunnel vision about bicycles above all else. And I would like to see more integration of them somehow into our full transportation system. I love them, but I've seen that happen. Parks and Rec, they have a very small board for a very large department that has a big budget. They also meet at the noon hour, and so people come in, sometimes they come late. I've attended some of these meetings and they have to leave early because they have to get back to work. It's difficult, and then it's hard for the public to get there to give public comment at their board meetings. So I would urge them to move it to an evening time, and I think the board needs to be expanded to be more representative of the community. I'm sorry?
3 minutes, 3 minutes.
Can I say one more thing?
One more thing.
Okay. I agree that it's inappropriate to have city staff on boards as voting members. It puts them in a really awkward position. I don't think it's ethical, actually. And even as non-voting members, it's weird. A city liaison is great. They're really helpful. But city staff, no. Thank you.
Thank you, KT. Any other public
Scott?
comment?
Claire, didn't we actually get rid of the bicycle?
Well,
Incorporated.
Into the
You folded bike advocacy into the new Transportation Commission, and then the MPO has a regional BAC.
Right. But it is part of the Transportation Commission now, right?
In my understanding, correct,
Yeah.
that Public Works staffs, yes.
Any other public comment? All right, let's take a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back.
Peel myself off the seat.
Has it been 5?
Yes.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Maybe you should put that on the shot clock for me when we do that. Okay, so we had wrapped up public comment. We're coming back for commission discussion. I guess one thing that I did want to bring up was the funding committees, like the Social Service Advisory Board. You know, I am a little uncomfortable with deleting those or merging those in some way, like the CDAC. Because like I was saying, that has to do with participatory budgeting, which I think is just so important for our city. One issue we haven't covered yet with the Social Services Advisory Board was having the United Way person as the chair. And in the past, you know, that has happened, and that's just a constant conflict of interest. So I don't know if there's some way that we can make it in the future so that person is not able to, perhaps, to become part of the executive committee or chair or whatever guidelines that might be created for them. That's just, I don't think that's appropriate. I know that's something that I talked to Casey about before. And I think Tony Wheeler too at one point, making sure it was even legal.
So taking a
Mayor,
member-
that board, the chair is just selected by an election of the
Yeah.
board members, so the
That's why I
current chair
mentioned-
is not that position.
If somehow we can make it so that they cannot be, because that's just not appropriate. Whether we keep them as a specific member or not, I'm not as concerned about, but when they're in a larger capacity, I'm a little concerned about it.
So Mayor, and, you know, I appreciate your comment there, but are we trying to come up with consistency in the way that these boards are arranged so that we know the number of terms, and if we're going to have term limits, and the selection of chair, and that, is it all going to be the same? Or do we want to, you know, in this particular case, and I appreciate the argument there,
Yeah.
but have a different way to go about the chair position?
Yeah. Since this is kind of preliminary discussions that we're having, it's something that I wanted to bring up. That has definitely been an issue that people have brought to me before.
Okay.
So whether we end up merging the TGT and Social Service Advisory Board, or if we don't and they stay separate, or whatever kind of thing we come up with, I just want to make sure that that is not allowed in the future. So I guess all of the boards wouldn't have the exact guidelines. Certainly they'll all have a template, but especially if we have specific types of people that we're looking for board positions, they're all going to be a little different in any ways. Does that make sense?
You know, maybe so that you maintain consistency, maybe the way to do it is to say that every board can select from among their membership who their chair would be, but that the city commission reserves the right to overturn that in cases where conflicts may be determined that would cause a problem. I mean, and so that you have consistency, and that exceptions could be made, you know, where if the city commission wished to step in, they could.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, they're your appointees.
Yeah.
It's a board that's advising you, so ultimately you do have that discretion.
I'd be comfortable with that kind of arrangement.
I'd like to get to a point where it's as consistent as we can make it.
Right.
Because it just makes it a lot simpler for everybody. And then for exceptions, you know, create some categories for reasons. I don't like to designate people that can't do things.
Right.
You know.
Does the chair of that board have any additional privilege than just a member of that board?
Well, who's the liaison of the Social Service
Besides being in the
Advisory
bully
Board?
pulpit, probably not.
Because, I mean, my question would be that if this is an individual we see as having a conflict of interest as the chair, would they not also have a conflict of interest simply by being at the table? And so I don't know that designating one person as not being capable of being the chair actually truly achieves anything other than an on-paper sense of feeling like we accomplished something.
You have the same situation in the transit guest tax.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have people that are in there that essentially are, you know, trying to create opportunities or events that directly, you know, have relationship to how successful their business is. So,
Housing Advisory Board would be the
same thing. You have these built-in conflicts with some of these, and what you're doing is you're selecting people that you hope have the greater good in mind, but there is the potential for that conflict to occur.
So, and some people, just by their skill set, have to be part of that board. And, I mean, electricians that are serving on an electric board of appeals, there's obviously a potential for a conflict there, but ultimately those are the people we have to have on that board.
Yeah.
And on a social service advisory board, I want people that understand social services and the funding mechanisms for social services on that board.
See, I think the thing that's a bit unique about the United Way director position is that they award funds to a number of social service agencies. And so, again, if the person loses track of their, you know, the grander good, and they revert back to their methodology within inside their own organization for how they would award funds, that's where I think that the conflict would occur. And, you know, you should, you know, as a commission, you should retain the right to step in and correct what you see to be perceived wrongs in terms of operations.
Yeah.
Commissioners, I might just add to that, that in the policy, the way we drafted it, we did specifically write that the bylaws would have to be approved by you. I know it's been a practice with a number of boards. I don't know that all the boards have done that, but that's another mechanism by which you would control the operation of the board. And if for some reason you saw something that was a concern, you could direct a change to the bylaws.
We don't expect you to write this. You know, what we're really trying to do is get some general guidance. We'll refine these things for you, bring them back, and I imagine there might be a couple of iterations of this before it gets to the point of satisfaction for this commission. But we're listening to what you're saying. We're trying to then determine how that would look in a policy setting for us, and we'll refine that for you.
I guess I'd like a staff response to Bobby Flory's comments about the diversity of opinion on these various boards that we might lose if we had one representative of each industry in that overall grouping.
Well, you know, I think Bobby kind of was giving us some cautions about some of those things. And, you know, for example, like the electrical review board, how many electricians do you need on there to make that kind of determination? It gets down to the selection of the people, whether it's one person making that decision or a committee making that decision of the same like professional individuals. And Bobby comes from, Ms. Flory comes from a position representing an industry of builders who are looking for justice in interpretations. I think that can be done by one person or it can be done by a committee. What happens if you decide it's going to be two, and what happens if those two can't agree? You know, so you have those kinds of issues. It comes down, like most things, to the selection of the people that you put on those boards. I still think that can be handled in a joint way. I really do.
Okay.
And there's a lot of, I think, of these different trades experts, quite frankly, that's what they become. There's a lot of transfer of knowledge from one trade skill set to others in making those determinations, from my experience.
So if we're not actually writing policy tonight, is there some low-hanging fruit that we can kind of universally agree on, that we can give clear direction?
Well, one of the things that I was thinking from the discussion earlier, and I think I counted enough noses, that we're probably going to have term limits.
City residency?
The city residency, in all cases possible. one of the things that I noticed that we have some with 3-year terms and some with 2-year terms.
Some with 4-year terms.
And some with 4-year terms. If we're going to put term limits on, what about an idea of either a 3 or a 4-year term consistent?
Yeah, I think that would
I
be
think
good.
3 is the starting place. And then I don't really see to rein in the 4s. I'm okay with the 4s we got.
I think 3 is okay.
So, but should we have them consistent throughout?
Well, I mean, I think the hospital board is one, I'm not sure how that, isn't that one that has a 4-year term?
See, and I would say, since we are going to limit the terms, you make them all 4. And then that way you take care of that, but, you know, I'll throw that out.
While I'm thinking about it, can I interject another thought in terms of this? One thing that I have observed in previous locations is that you consider the concept of having alternate persons appointed, so you have an alternate list. And so when you run into a shortage of people, so this goes to the quorum issue, that you have an alternate that can fill in. And you'd be surprised how often the alternate gets called in, because it isn't just one person that's always gone, it's a multitude of people. And that alternate then is being trained to assume the full-time role over a period of time, but it prevents on a lot of occasions persons, you know, or boards not having a quorum. So if you want us to explore that idea, especially on some boards that are really critical, like some of the ones Scott works with on a regular basis, having some alternate members might be a good way to avoid having non-quorum situations.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'd be interested in staff looking into that. And
Okay.
Loading up the list. The other one would be, for me anyway at this point, the idea of city employees serving. I mean, somebody in the past have made those appointments, proud to make those appointments. I think conflicts of interest we can limit those. Tom, we're going to have a disagreement on this one, but I think we got some good people that have been able to step up and do the deal and be able to step away when they have to. But
part of it is, like with the United Way example, is there's a very large public perception of conflict of interest. So I don't see this so much as me saying, you know, the woman, Erica from the United Way, had conflicts of interest, and I think she made terrible decisions. It's not what I'm saying. It's just, I had several people come up to me, different individuals over several years, saying, you know, there is a really big perception of conflict of interest, no matter how hard she might say that she's going to be objective or whatever. The perception is difficult to get away from.
I see that, and you know, in my profession, we're always talking about how much we would love to be able to elect school board members that actually taught for a living, you know, but we can't. I mean, if we work in a school, you know, it's that perception of I've made a choice to work in a school, and that choice takes me out of running for a school board position, and that's something I accept. And you know, I think that perception is very real. So.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think that we need to have the roles be very clear and separated.
okay.
Hey, we were talking earlier about having commission representatives on boards where money was involved. And I just noticed on the governing body boards that several of these receive money that don't have any representation from the commission. Is that?
Which ones are you looking at?
Like the Public Health Board, Memorial Hospital Board, Mental Health Board,
So is that something that we should
Library
add?
Board. I don't know.
What would does staff have?
I think the creation of the health board, isn't that a joint board between the city and the county?
It is, yeah.
And not to delve into what I've already delved into previously, but I think one of the challenges there is having the dual heads of state, so to speak, between the city and the county, and not have clear kind of direction, and it's all been, and complete authority has kind of been transferred over there. But then we found out, if you recall this story, we found out that in personnel matters, right, with the health board, the liability redounds back to the city or the county, and so, jointly, and so then our legal counsel is, and the city and county administration is getting involved in making personnel decisions. We can't remove ourselves, extricate ourselves from those kinds of decisions. So my understanding is my predecessor and the current county administrator had an understanding that the county administrator would be the advisor or the adjudicator, you know, on those issues, so that there was one person making the decision. Going back to the issue, well, what if you had two people that are supposed to be the head of that organization and they can't agree on a particular issue? And Craig and I have carried that on for the time being as well. So
I guess I'd say we need to clarify our roles before we.
well, but I think that's one of the things that the county board wishes to talk to the commission about, city commission about, and that meeting in January. And so that's one of those things that I think you might want to delay that conversation to that point.
This reminds me, looking at the list, one question that I had is destination management and Explore Lawrence, how come those aren't combined into
I've
one?
been there, done that.
Yeah.
No, seriously, it's a long story, it goes back several years.
I think we
but-
split them
Yeah, we split them to get them apart, so.
Oh, okay.
recently. Painfully, as Casey would say.
Stuart, bring them back together, would you?
The circle goes around, you know, what can you say?
It does.
I think for me, one of the most difficult ones I'm battling with is the sister cities. Because I think Mayor Shum made some really valid points when he talked about what sort of message, you know, why are we, if at the end of the day, it's effectively the same thing. At the end of the day, we're still giving them money. At the end of the day, we still have a city liaison. At the end of the day, we still want to keep those relationships.
Very much.
Are we potentially risking quite a bit in sending a message that without a real, true benefit gained?
Well-
and then, you know, I know what you're going to say about the 501c3, and I'm 100% there with you, but to me, that's the one I struggle with.
The question is it an advisory board or is it something else? I mean, is it an independent organization that's acting, making its own decisions, doing its own thing? Or is it an advisory board to this body?
And you can have a resolution designating them as the representative for the city. I understand what Bob was saying about cultures, have dealt with sister cities from different parts of the world as well. And there are cultural differences in interpretation, but I think you could structure that in a way that does not cause an international incident, so to speak, that you could have that relationship. I think part of, in what wasn't said during that conversation, quite frankly, is that there's a very strong social aspect to the persons that are interested in that from the city standpoint and get involved in that. And having them have created this 501c3 and their passion for that international exchange, I mean, it's like Rotary. That's what Rotarians are known for, is the international, relationship building. I think that you could still make that work. I understood what Mr. Shum was saying, but I'm not convinced that can't work in some tangential way rather than just a committee designation. And it keeps us out of the position of appointing and removing people that are also part of a 501c3.
And that was the other side of it. The comment I made to him was, this would be one group that I see the term limits maybe not being great for. I mean, that group is 100% relationship building.
Yeah.
And so to say, your 6 years are up, you're out, doesn't make any sense from a sister city standpoint.
And I don't see the city walking away or doing anything less than we currently do in those types of relationships as the delegations come over from our 3 sister cities and ours go back. The proclamations, the welcoming ceremonies, the tours of the facilities. We'd still want to do all that. That could be ensconced into a resolution quite nicely. And I don't think that there would be anything lost in the translation or the transparency of our relationship.
So I'd be interested in seeing some resolution to see how that would look on paper.
We can come up with something.
Well,
'Cause I do
I'm
worry
still a
about-
big supporter of the board, but
I think
I understand.
Yeah. I think a good point is that it's not really not an advisory board, but it's very important for us to have that connection. I don't want to lose that.
And that's why I had asked the question earlier about whether or not it can contractually be put together, and resolution probably makes sense also. So anyway.
Is there any other direction that you're looking for?
Mayor, I think we'll bring a policy back to you then with the direction that you provided. If there's any other input that you have with regard to any of the recommendations related to any of the specific boards, for example, if you want to maybe just focus on the ones that you want to entertain any changes to and leave the other ones, we could bring that back and then how you want to process that.
We need that overall
So-
policy too.
Were we in agreement with the recommendation on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and the Cultural Arts Commission?
I wouldn't call mine an agreement. I think
agree.
I'd have to see more of
I
how
think we need to,
that
I
would
think we
work.
need to flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
to
would
get
like the
input.
Yeah,
discussion to continue.
I guess we didn't talk about it. Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, I don't see it that we're heading there.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'm not really interested in combining the social service funding and the transient guest tax funding, but I would like to consider the CDAC and the social service funding together, because they're both kind of in that same neck of the woods, whereas the TDT is a little bit more commercial, economic development type thing. That's
The point that they don't meet all the time. Both of those
Yeah.
committees don't meet all the time.
I think we need to submit these ideas to the boards and have more time for their feedback, especially for the Parks and Rec and Cultural
Well, we'll come
Arts.
back with some more
I also
fleshing out.
I
for-
think merging that JEDC function with PERC is a good idea. I'm like that.
And getting the commission off of,
Yeah, getting the commission.
off the board.
Yeah, I'm
Right,
okay with those
right.
things.
I think the Human Relations Commission and Lawrence Alliance is a natural fit.
Yeah. And the obsolete boards, obviously, yeah, that's great.
The obsolete boards, I was a little bit surprised on the Downtown Parking Advisory Board being eliminated, especially after, what we've kind of put together with parking in downtown, but I don't want to serve. So.
Say, Mike, I'll give you a call in January.
No. No, but I was a little bit surprised that we made.
You're going to have some free time after the first.
I'm looking at this, it would seem to me it'd be a natural fit, but I can't remember the last time that board met,
Yeah, they
Nor
don't.
can staff.
nor can they.
It's not like we've been talking about parking or anything, huh?
Who's on that board?
And the alternate,
No one.
No one's on that
No one
board.
is on those 3
All
boards.
deceased.
were you interested in the alternate idea? Did we already?
Yes, I
I
like
think
the
that is,
alternate. Yeah.
I think that's a very good
That's a great
idea.
idea.
Solid
So we
recommendation.
talked about it.
It's not my idea, I just saw
Take
it
credit
someplace
for it,
else.
yeah. Okay.
Did we cover all the?
Just one more thing, as some of these boards might merge together, will you see a change, or will we see a change in the number of positions on the boards?
I
Or is
think
that something you'll-
that could be, again, as I mentioned,
I'd say yes.
There may be some that could be just completely absorbed into an existing board, but then there could be some others that you want to reconfigure. So I think, we could bring some ideas back to you all, and you could provide us some additional feedback on how you wish to structure that.
All right, thanks.
One thank you, Mayor, that somebody that helps you a lot, and mayors in the past and mayors in the future, is Bobby Wackoff.
Oh, yeah.
With
Bobby.
helping us with appointments. I mean, man, oh, man. She helped me a lot, I know.
I had no idea how much I would be talking with Bobby all of the time. And she's good at reminding me. She's like, I've got people asking me about this appointment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. All right, any other last minute things that we have not thought of?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So we've already adjourned, so I guess I'm just gonna close this meeting.
Okay.
How about that?
See you tomorrow.